Hey everyone, welcome to this video. This is 100 GarageBand tips, tricks, and shortcuts. It's going to be a really long video, and I want to not be rushed on time because with every tip, trick, and shortcut, I want to give a little bit of context and use it in an example with a song I have here so we can go through it and you can take it and then use it in practice with your songs. Because it will be on the longer side, I will timestamp every single tip in the description and I base it on categories. You can also, like in the bottom right hand corner of this video, you can save it to watch for later, or you can add it as a liked video and give it a thumbs up, which I would appreciate anyways. I'm going to play 10 or 15 seconds of this song. This is my song that we're going to be using as the example to go through all of these tips and tricks. This song is mine. It's available on Spotify if you want to listen to it. If you don't want to listen to it right now, just skip ahead. It's going to be about 15 seconds.
Get to you. There's something bothering me. I don't know what you've been through. You give me nothing we can talk to. Ever since I could call you, never have we lost.
If you want to listen to the rest of the song, you can go listen to it. But that's all I want to play, just to give you the context so you know where we're coming from with the examples. So let's start with the first category, which is project setup and talking about the GarageBand application. Tip number one would be to try out existing GarageBand templates. When you open up GarageBand, you're going to be shown this screen. Notice on the side here, there's a couple things like recent projects you have. There are lessons you can take, but I want to focus on project templates. So if you are a singer-songwriter or a hip-hop artist or electronic DJ, you can start with these templates, and I'll open up the songwriter one. That's my background. Notice how it's just fills the project with all of these tracks in place. It could be overwhelming for you if you're very fresh to GarageBand, you don't know what these are. But if you have a bit of experience, you can jump right in and start recording your vocal or start recording a guitar or a bass line or piano. If you have an idea you really want to lay down quickly, this is a great starting point. And you can check out the hip hop ones and the DJ ones as well. Tip number two is when you're starting out with a new project in GarageBand, we can take this one as an example, set a project tempo. So at the top here, this one happens to be 96. I would lock in just something to start with. If you start a brand new session from scratch, an empty project, I believe it's 120. That's a fast song. There's no problem with it. But I would recommend if you want a slower song or more of a ballad type, set the tempo early on because this is going to just set the foundation for your song. Specifically when it comes to drummer tracks and the loop library over here. Every time you drag in a loop or you start a drummer track, like these yellow ones, they're going to be based off your time signature. So if you plan to record audio, set a tempo as your foundation. If you plan just to work in MIDI, then it's okay. You can flip-flop with tempo because MIDI changes very nicely when you change the tempo. Tip number three, which also has to do with tempo, is you can change the tempo over time of your song. If you type in Shift-Command-T, it's going to open this tempo little thing here. You could also just go to track and go here, show tempo track, and the shortcut is on the right, Shift-Command-T. Notice how we're at 140. So if we wanted the first 9 bars of our song to be 140, that's cool. We can click here at bar 9, make a dot, and have maybe from bar 9 to bar 19, have that as a slower. So I'm just clicking and dragging that line down. You make it whatever you want, and then you can bring it back up. You can slowly bring it back up if you want. You can curve it. A lot of pop music really just keeps a standard tempo. So you don't have to worry about this. You can always just highlight everything and just backspace. And now you're back at your regular tempo. So just get rid of that again by holding Shift-Command-T. Tip number 4 is choosing a project key. Like setting the foundation with tempo, it's good to set the foundation with your key here. You might not know this if you're just brainstorming and you're kind of just messing around on the keyboard. That's okay. But when you decide you want to sing in C major or D major, whatever, it's a good idea to choose it here because this sets the foundation for your Apple loops. Whenever you drag in an Apple loop, it will transpose it to your key. I can put the 70 rock piano in. Now this is in F sharp minor. And notice if I transpose this up, let's say 2 semitones to G sharp minor, it's going to sound higher. So a good thing to set foundation with choosing a project key. Tip number 5, and staying on project key, is just like how you can change project tempo over time, you can also do that with project key. So back up to track here, and then show transposition track, Shift Command X. Similar like user experience, you can click dots and drag keys down. We are, in the key of G sharp minor here at the top. So if I want to say at bar 3, well, transpose up 4 semitones or down 1 semitone, you have the flexibility to do so. Simple example, if at bar 3 you want to actually drop it to G sharp G minor, well then you would take this line and drop it down 1 semitone. Tip number 6 would be to have a custom time signature. So I'll just remove this by doing Shift Command X, this transposition track. Notice that we are in 4/4. This is 4 beats per bar. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's very standard. Most songs are in 4/4. So if you have no familiarity with that, you can likely ignore this. However, not a lot, but some people want to have different time signatures. So in 5/4, 6/8, or 3/4. You can also go to custom and choose the number of beats you would like. And notice as I change this, the grid will change. So if I only want 2 beats, notice that the grid has changed, giving you only 2 beats per bar. So you have that flexibility to design a custom key signature. In this tip, I'm going to go back to my song here, and I'll talk about connecting your MIDI controller. I have one right in front of me. It's the Arturia Keylab 49. And so if you have a MIDI controller, the easiest way to connect it to GarageBand is just plug it in through USB. If GarageBand doesn't automatically recognize it, which it should, if it doesn't, go to up here, GarageBand Preferences, down to MIDI, and reset the MIDI drivers. This should solve your problem. Tip number 8 is actually kind of like a reverse tip. It's not really beneficial, but it will clear any question that you might have. I get this question a lot, which is, can you use on your MIDI controller the dials and the faders to connect things in GarageBand? And no, you can't. That's called MIDI mapping, and that's something that's not available in GarageBand. That's like a reverse tip, tip number 8. Tip number 9 would be to use GarageBand with Zoom, actually. And I did this a lot over the pandemic, which was to have songwriting sessions in GarageBand or Logic. What you need to do with Zoom is to, on the Zoom side of things, to install a what they call a Zoom audio device, and then you go to GarageBand Preferences, and you would just set your output to the Zoom audio device here. It sets up kind of like an aggregate device, so you can output all the sound from GarageBand directly to the other person's computer. So it sounds very, very crisp. Very, very beneficial if you're doing co-writing sessions. Sticking a little bit in the preferences window here, tip number 10 is the metronome. I do not like the tone of the metronome that's by default, so you can change the tone here. If I just mute these and play the click track for a second, I'll explain all those shortcuts I just did a little bit later. But yeah, changing the tone or the volume. Be careful when you increase the volume of the click. If you're recording vocals or you're recording anything, sometimes the volume of the metronome, the click, can bleed through your headphones into the microphone. So that's something you do want to watch out for. Tip number 11 is the tuner. Actually, GarageBand comes with a built-in tuner. You might be asking yourself, why is it gray all the time? And the tuner actually only lights up when it notices that you have a guitar plugged into your audio interface. And when that guitar is plugged into your audio interface and you have your channel inputs set up correctly, I go through that later. And I also have other videos on that if you don't know what I'm talking about there. When you set up your guitar correctly, you can now click the tuner and just tune directly in GarageBand. Tip number 12 is you can import video into GarageBand and it can extract the audio. So if you have a YouTube video that you want to just edit a bit of the audio, you can just separate those two things. So here's a live video of a song I did. I'm just going to click and drag right down to the bottom empty space. And notice how it just pops up the actual video of me singing, but it's also has, I can just X that. And now it has the audio here. I can solo it and just have a listen to the audio. And now it's just the audio from that video. If I need to edit, if this is a YouTube video or anything, you can do the editing in here if you need to cut something or you need to edit a bit of a click or a pop. Tip number 13 is importing audio and MIDI files in GarageBand. Notice if you go to the top here, file, there's no import option. What you do to import is just click and drag. So exactly what I did with the movie track. So find your MIDI track. Here's a MIDI track. I'm just clicking, dragging it into that gray space. You're going to get a notification. If you want to import tempo information, that's up to you. I'm not going to import the tempo right now. And notice now I just have that green MIDI track there with the default software instrument here. So you can go over to your library and start changing your desired software instrument that you want to play that MIDI. Exact same thing with audio. I can just go find the audio I want. Here's an acoustic loop. I can click and drag that in. Now I have both audio files here and they're ready to go in my project. Tip number 14 is importing music memo files or voice notes. I often do this on my phone. I'm playing guitar. I have an idea. I record a little voice note and then I just quickly share it as an audio file to my MacBook using AirDrop. So I just shared a little, here it is, new idea. I just shared that right now. And here's my new idea that I can start building a song around. And then you just can go quickly that way. You can also get the voice memos or music memos application right in your MacBook as well, and you can have those sync over iCloud. You can do either one. Tip number 15 is exporting your song as MP3 or WAV, and why might you choose one or the other? It's at the top here, share, export song to disk. Now, if you're just sharing your song to your friends, you want a demo, I suggest doing just MP3. Medium quality or high quality is fine. Low quality is actually pretty low quality, and that's when it can start to mess your song up a little bit, but has really extremely low file size. So that's why they give you the option. WAV is something you're going to want. It's a higher file size, but it's higher quality. And if you're going to put this on YouTube or SoundCloud, Apple Music, Spotify, you're going to want to have it in WAV. If you want to, it will just export the entire session, like from this bar 1 to all the way over here to bar like 100. If you don't want that, you can put this yellow bar, it's called the cycle bar, and you can just choose the range you want to export. Go back here, share, export song to disk, and then you can click export cycle area, and that's going to only export bar 1 to bar like 70 there or something. That's exporting. There is also an option to do directly to Apple Music or to SoundCloud. I've never done that. You do have to just set it up with your accounts, and then you can go directly to right to those platforms. Tip number 16, also on exporting, would be the default setting that is on in GarageBand. If I go to GarageBand preferences, it's called in advanced. It's called auto-normalize. So this likely is on for you, and it says when you export a project, auto-normalizes increases the volume if needed, so the project is not too quiet. You can think of auto-normalize as just saying it will make your song here, your file that you're exporting, louder if it's not loud enough. So if you want to do a quick share to your friends and you just need to boost the volume up, this is good to have on. If you are mastering a song or if you really like the sound of at the volume of your session, then make sure this is off. If it's off, it's not going to fuss with anything in your session. If you've noticed you've exported a song and it sounds distorted sometimes, or things are just way louder than you wanted them to be, it's likely that this is on. So this is what that button does. Tip number 17, also in the export realm, is the left tab and preferences is you can fill out your composer name, artist name, album name, and playlist. If you're working on an album and all that, you want that metadata saved, then you can just have it by default here. So if I write my name, I also happen to be the composer. Let's say it's one of my old albums, King of My Own, and I actually, I don't know what you would put in the playlist. I guess any playlist you want. This is likely for Apple Music, so I can just X that down. But to be honest, I don't need that here. Tip number 18 is file save location. So sometimes all the time when you just do Command S or file save as, it saves it by default in the GarageBand folder in your Finder window, which happens to be in your root folder under music, and then in the folder GarageBand. And here's all your GarageBand project files. If you just want to change that, you can go File, Save As, and then go to this drop-down window here, and then choose something like your desktop, or maybe you have My Music, you start a new folder. I've seen people just not know where their files are after saving it because the GarageBand folder is nested a little bit deeper by default. Okay, that's it for project setup and applications. Let's get on to the next category of tips, tricks, and shortcuts, which is workflow and productivity. Tip number 19 is a shortcut to open up your preferences. All the time you will be going to GarageBand preferences, right? So just notice here, by the way, every shortcut that is available will be on the right side. So Command, comma. So get to know these shortcuts. So you'll be pressing Command, comma a lot to open up preferences, and it will open up back to the default where you were. So we were on My Info. I usually have it on General, exit down, Command, comma to bring it back up. What I'm doing is usually opening up and changing the devices. So if I'm doing a songwriting session on Zoom, or I want to reroute it to my Bluetooth speakers or AirPods or whatever, I'm changing the output and input device a lot. And then you can do Command W to close the window. So Command, comma, opening it up, Command W, closing it down. Next tip would be getting to know the shortcuts to generate tracks quickly. So software instrument tracks, audio tracks, and drummer tracks. So you're going to want to get to know A, S, and U, and the Option and Command buttons. So Option Command A would be to open an audio track. So Option Command A, I have a new audio track here. Option Command U, which is a new drummer track, and Option Command S, which is a new software instrument track. So again, Command A, U, S. I just generated 3 more tracks: audio, drummer, and software. So much faster than going track up here, new track, and then choosing it here. It's all about trying to find those ways to minimize the number of clicks so you can just work faster. Tip number 21, which is removing tracks or deleting tracks. So notice how we just added all these 6 tracks. Well, instead of going right-click, delete, you can actually just go Command backspace and just filter up to the tracks you want to delete and do Command backspace. Here, Command backspace. On tracks that have regions, it's going to give you a notification that, hey, there's a region here. Yes, we want to delete it. Delete audio track 8, Command backspace. So again, Option Command S for new software instrument. If you made a mistake, just go Command backspace to delete the track. Now let's say we want to add 2 software instrument tracks. So we know how to add one. We go Option Command S, and we could do Option Command S again, and that would give us 2. But we could also do Command D, which is a duplicating track. So for example, and here's a workflow that I would use a lot. I'm just going to delete one by going Command backspace. If I'm in a session and I'm writing a song and recording, I know I have a lead vocal track up here, right? So if I'm thinking, oh, you know what, in this part of the song, I want to sing something else. So instead of going and using Option Command A to add an audio track, I'm going to duplicate this lead vocal track because I know it has all my plugins and audio settings built into this track. I don't want to start fresh with the new audio track. So I would go to lead vocal and do Command D. And now I can have a new exact lead vocal track with the same settings. So I can just double click this and name it like harmonies. And then I can go right away and record my harmonies. Tip number 24 is to use C, the shortcut C, which is turning your cycle bar on and off. So if I just press C now, It's default to where we extended it a few tips before. And you can just click and drag at the top and drag your cycle bar anywhere. You can shorten it or lengthen it. Now, I use like pressing C on my keyboard to turn that on and off a lot because, as I was saying, when we duplicated this lead vocal track and went to the harmonies here, if I know I want to record the harmonies at the chorus, which starts at bar 17, well, I can just cycle it here. And now whenever I press spacebar or I press record, it starts at the cycle bar when the cycle bar is on. So notice when I press spacebar,
but I can't read your mind. I don't know
what starts right at the chorus. Notice if I'm just over here too, and I press spacebar again, it starts there.
But I can't.
The same thing happens with recording. So if you press R right now or here, it will start recording your harmonies at that point. Now that you know that, if you can just be pressing C on and off. So if I know I'm over here and I want to start at bar 9, I just have to remember to put C off, and then it will start where the playhead is.
Give me nothing we can talk to.
But now I know that behind the scenes, the cycle bar is at 17, so I can press C spacebar to jump right to the chorus.
But I can't read.
Press it off. So it's about the kind of the workflow of using C to your advantage to help you not have to click the playhead and drag it everywhere to where you want it to start. So I already made my first mistake. I kind of thought this was going to come. That was tip number 23. This is actually tip number 24. Let's open up our preferences by going Command, comma, and go over to General. And notice we have a cycle only for software instrument recording. So when you have a software instrument, and we can just go back here, Command W now to close that window, and we know how to add a software instrument, Option Command S. Our cycle is on. Let's open up our preferences again, Command, comma. And you'll start to, these will start to be baked into your head eventually. So when the cycle is off, you can replace or merge. When the cycle is on, you can also create tracks or merge. You can create tracks, which would mean that when you are recording a software instrument, so let's say I just want to record a bit of this classic electric piano, right? Press R on my keyboard to record. Now just record, whatever, I'll stop it. I'm now going to record over this again. So notice what happened. It just generated 2 tracks for me. I have this number 2, where I have the first take, and then I can click here again and have a second take. So we set that up by in the preferences. That's what that was. We created tracks when the cycle bar is on. If we wanted to merge those together, now merge, if I just close that down and delete this, if I record, the same thing, here we go. And if I record over that, it's going to play what I just played. So I may have missed a note, so I can just merge a note into this. So I just added a note in, and it sounds bad. But if it's off, you can have it replace the recording that's there. So if you record something over, it will just replace it. Or again, you can merge into the recording. Typically what I would do is I'd probably have it as merge when it's off, and I'd have create tracks when it's on. But that is a completely subjective thing. Tip number 25 is just pressing S on your keyboard, and that's going to solo out the tracks that you're highlighted on. So if I just want to listen to the drums, I just press S, and now I can press spacebar. And then I can also just press S while it's being played, and it will bring the whole track into play.
Can you give me a little?
So it's helpful if you want to dial in on a sound, bring the whole sound back.
A bruise on your pride.
Go
Cause
down
I wanna
here.
get to know you more
Now I'm
than just
focusing on
your
the vocal.
good side. I've been trying to get cozy. Oh, maybe.
Very, very helpful tip. Tip number 26, same idea, is just pressing M while you're listening to things. So M will mute tracks, S will solo tracks. So just like S, it's helpful when you're listening to the song, especially when you're producing and you're designing a sound or you're trying to mix tracks together. I like to go through the tracks and mute tracks to know if it's adding value. Like if I'm listening to the song and mute the drums, you're going to hear that, right?
Can you give me a little?
The whole song sounds completely
I don't
different.
care if I'm up all night. So
The drums are adding a lot of value. What happens when I mute the effects?
but I can't read your mind. I don't know why you still hide. Can you give me a little? I don't care if I'm up all night.
Much harder to hear, right? It's adding a bit of depth because there's a lot of reverb in the effects, but it's helpful just to like cycle the mutes on and off on different tracks while you're listening to things to see the value. Tip number 27 on solo and mutes as well. If you have the drums soloed and the lead vocal and the guitars, and you're just kind of mixing or working on only these 3 tracks,
I don't know why you still hide.
and you want to hear the whole track in context again, well, you would have to go and click each track and press S, right? But you don't have to do that, actually. This tip is, if you have it like this, you can click, hold, and just drag down, and it's going to take those off. So same thing goes if you had different tracks muted, like these 3 tracks muted, and you were just working here. Now I can click and drag, and bring those in.
Can you give me a?
Click and drag, now everything's muted. I just clicked and dragged down.
So don't be scared to put a bruise on your pride. I get to know you more than just.
So that click and drag functionality, definitely use that to your advantage. Tip number 28 is also the ability to turn off soloed tracks. Just like I did click and drag, this is helpful, right? But what if you have hundreds of tracks in your GarageBand session? The click and drag functionality starts to become irrelevant because then you'll be just clicking and dragging. It will be really a long list of tracks. So if you have many different tracks and different things soloed, you can do Control Option Command, so 3 fingers right on the Mac, and then press S. That's going to turn all the soloed tracks off. If you do it again, it will turn them back on. So you can be listening to this section,
But I can't read your mind.
and then you bring everything back in with Control Option S.
Can you give me a little?
Press it again.
I don't care if I'm up all night. So don't be scared to.
So it's helpful when you want to kind of compare, like bounce back like that, by going back and forth from those solo tracks and bringing everything back in. You can also use the click and drag functionality, but it's helpful when you have lots of tracks. Cool, let's move on to tip number 29. Now let's get into this area. If we make a cut here on the drums, by going right click, split at playhead. Now we have a drum region here. Notice how this is now split into 2. So we can do top right and loop this if we wanted to, but we can also just press L, and that loops any regions that you have. You can also do this everything at once. So if I highlight all these and press L, notice how it loops everything. L is a quick way to just extend different regions, but you can also do it at the top right. Tip number 30 is making quick copies of regions. This is a tip I do all the time. How I'm going to show you how to do this tip is quickly, I'm just going to make a cut on all of these regions, splitting them at the playhead, and then I'm just going to split the dead space off at the end. And I'm going to press backspace to delete that ending. Now, quick copies of regions these are separate regions. So if I click one, hold Option, and then click again and drag, I'm creating a copy of this region. I can do that to every specific region on its own, or I can also do it multiple regions at a time, just holding Option with your thumb or whatever, and then clicking and dragging. And then I'm making copies of all those regions. Yeah, that's the one you're going to really want to remember to help out. Because the only other alternative there, right, is doing this Command C and then Command V. I mean, that in itself is also a shortcut, but it's much faster just doing it with Option click. The same thing also goes in the editor window. And this is the window, like the scissors window. So if we open up the scissors window for like this lead vocal region, I mean, you might be familiar with this window as well. It looks different with MIDI and software instrument tracks. So if I just add a software instrument track, Option Command S, and again I record, press S to solo it out, press R and just like record a little thing in here like we did before. Press spacebar to stop the recording. So if I open up the scissors window and look at my MIDI data, I can also do the option click and drag to make copies of this. So let's say if I want to extend this region, and I also want the same chord progression happening on this bar, bar 57, I can click and drag to highlight them all. I could also do Command A to select all. Hold Option, click, and drag. Now I have the same progression. I just clicked and dragged like I did in the region up here, making copies of these. I can do them down here, making copies of MIDI notes. It can also just be specific notes, like one at a time or two at a time. Whatever you have highlighted, you can make quick copies by holding Option and clicking. Tip number 31, let's start talking a little bit about how you manage zooming. And I'm just gonna close this editor window down up here, pressing the scissors, zooming left and right. You can do it with the Command key. So hold Command and then go, if you do left or right arrow on your keyboard, you can zoom in horizontally like this. If I want to zoom out horizontally, just hold Command and do left arrow. And now I'm going back out here. So in context, you might be wanting to look at the bass. So let's solo out the bass by pressing S. I'll hold Command and I'll just press right. Now I'm zooming in on that note. On this, it also is important to know that it doesn't necessarily zoom into where the playhead is, although you might think that. It also happens to do with what region you're clicked on. So notice that this region here, this bass.5, is clicked. This bass.3 is not clicked. So if I do Command right arrow, it still zooms in on the bass 5. But if I click on bass.3 region, and this is the naming, I'm getting it from the left here. If I do Command right arrow, now it zooms in on the playhead. So that's something to know. On this as well, like a little side caveat, is the window size. So what we're doing here, Command left and right arrow, is the same thing as doing this little slider here. It's the exact same thing. But notice you can hardly see it, but in the top right, you can get this icon up here. It's called End Marker. And you can make the session of your GarageBand window small like this. And now we can only edit in this space. You would never do that, but just as an example, you could now drag it and extend it. So if your song is longer, you can make it a really big window. But that will affect, if it's really big like that, that's going to affect your zooming. So if I hold Command and do left arrow, notice that I can't zoom in any further than that because the zoom is based on your window size. So if I just make this, the end marker smaller, now watch, I can zoom in Command left and I can zoom and you have a better picture, right? Because it's now representing the entire window space, your end marker. So make sure your end marker is actually where your song ends and you don't happen to be producing or making music like this where there's so much negative space here. You don't need that negative space because it's going to affect your zooming. If you have a trackpad, or like I have a trackpad in my left hand and a mouse in my right hand, you have the ability to do pinch zooming as well. So that's an easy thing if you are familiar with using a trackpad. Tip number 32 is using the comma and period keys, or like the triangular left and right brackets, to move the playhead. So if you want to move the playhead with your mouse, you can click and drag. But notice how I'm at bar 15 here on the playhead, or let's say just bar 17. So you can see where I'm at. I can just go periods and moving that over to the right one bar at a time. And then I can go comma or left triangular bracket and move it over one bar at a time left. So you can do a lot of things without having to use your mouse and jump over to use your mouse. So you can get comfortable with Command comma, moving the playhead one bar at a time left and right. Tip number 33, also on playhead, is using the return or the enter key on your Mac keyboard. So if you press return or enter, it will snap the playhead to position 1, like the beginning. So that's great if you know your song starts at bar 1, you just can press enter spacebar. And now ready. Enter again, back to position 1. So you no longer have to click and drag and use your mouse. The same thing, if you do Option Enter, it's going to snap to the final bit of the song. So if I just delete this region and press Option Enter again, it snaps to the very last region of the song. So these regions here. Or just Enter and press spacebar and I can start playing the song again. Tip number 34, also on playhead movements as well. It's really important to know the playhead movements because this is where you start and stop recordings as well. So this tip is using shift click with your mouse. If you hold shift and click on any gray area, so like all this space here, just hold shift and click, that's going to snap the playhead to that position. So just holding shift and clicking. It's a lot easier than going up to the top here and dragging over to bar 53. For let's say, like if you want to get to bar 9, all you have to do is click and go here, and now you're there. So once you know shift click and enter to get back to position 1 and period and comma to move bars at a time, you can really start moving the playhead quickly. On top of that, remember we have C as an option too. So I know whenever I can press C and spacebar to play my chorus.
But I can't read your mind.
I can also press Enter to get to the beginning of the song. Or I can press period to go right over to the first verse. Or shift click to go anywhere else in the song. Tip number 35 is page up or page down. This actually only works if you have multiple tracks that you need to filter your pages. So in our session, we don't have to go up or down in vertical zoom because we still have space for more tracks. We only have this number of tracks. Let's say in context, like we had like many vocal tracks. So I'm just going to do Command D like many times. I'm duplicating all these lead vocal tracks. Okay. So I have a ton of lead vocal tracks now, right? That I might make harmony tracks or whatever. Now I can scroll down vertically, right? So I have a scroll on my mouse that I usually do. You can also do pinch zoom or vertical zoom on a trackpad. But the other shortcut is to do Function on a Mac and then up and down with your keyboard. And that just filters through vertical zoom like this quickly. So let's just delete those. And this is I guess a reverse tip that I'll just add in here. You can't, unfortunately, highlight multiple tracks at a time. It's something that I really dislike about GarageBand. So I have to go through each one here and just do Command backspace. Typically, like in Logic Pro, the parent DAW, you can, if I have lead vocal and then press Shift and click that lead vocal, it would highlight all those tracks. And I could delete multiple tracks at once, but in GarageBand, you cannot do that. Let's move on to tip number 36, which is opening the windows the pop-up windows that you'll need to be using a lot in GarageBand when you're editing and producing music. So I'll go through all the big ones here. There are 4 big ones. The library, which is Y. That's a shortcut to open up the library. If you are trying to work on this classic electric piano sound, let's just solo it out. And you realize that you don't like that software instrument, press Y, go to maybe a piano or a synthesizer, something else, and you can press Y to get that back. So Y is a handy one, pops out from the left. E and B are the next ones. E is for editor, so you can quickly edit MIDI notes. Press E again, and that disappears. B is the controls window. So these windows are up here. We have controls, and we have scissors. So E is scissors, and B is controls. So think of scissors as editing things, cutting things, moving things. Controls as manipulating the sound. We can pop that window back down by doing B. And then the one from the right is O. So this is the loop library. If we want to bring in a rock piano or whatever, you can do filters up here as well. And just press O to get rid of that. So Y from the left, O from the right, and then E and B from the bottom. Tip number 37, which is also a window that you don't use as much, but a shortcut that is handy when you're writing songs, specifically lyrics. So let's say I didn't have a lead vocal track and I was cycling at my chorus, so C. I'm trying to figure out lyrics. Well, the shortcut for that is Option Command P, and now I have a notepad and I can say, okay, lyrics, and I can just start writing ideas here. And then I can go Option Command P to get rid of that. Press spacebar again. You can still press the shortcut right now and start writing. Option Command P. So helpful to, instead of going to the Notes app, there's the availability to do it right in GarageBand here. So let's move on to the next category in these 100 tips and tricks and talk about editing. So this would be tip number 38, and it happens to talk about cutting. So you notice, like in the previous tips, I highlighted these and did a right click, and I did split at playhead. But the easier function here is Command T. So that's when you, wherever your playhead is, it will make a cut in your highlighted region. So if you have all these regions highlighted at the chorus, you could do Command T and cut those and cut at the end of the chorus too. Or you can just cut specific regions at a time. You're going to be cutting a lot when you're editing, and you're going to get really used to Command T. The same thing goes for MIDI data as well. So if I take this classic electric piano and just make a copy holding Option, just the previous tip we used, and have it come in on our chorus here as well. Let's extend it. I could cut it here, Command T, and delete that region if I wanted, and maybe make some new MIDI notes for this verse too. Now, when you cut like in a MIDI note, so notice how these MIDI notes, if I try to cut right in the middle of them and I do Command T, it's actually just going to delete those MIDI notes. So that's something to keep in mind when you cut those MIDI notes. Tip number 39 is rejoining regions together. So this is a good example here. If we focus on the Steinway grand piano here again, I can just lower the editor. If I do Command T to cut this region, now I have two regions, which is fine. But if you wanted to join them back together, you could highlight them both and do Command J. Or I could actually highlight these regions together and do Command J again, and it provides space. So from like a bird's eye view, it cleans things up. This doesn't make sense to have all this empty space because there's no MIDI data in it. So you could actually just scroll back like this. Same thing goes for audio tracks. So if I want this cut to be back, I could just highlight these regions, do Command J, and now I have a clean audio track again. Tip number 40 is using Command X to delete regions, and that will automatically have it copied to your clipboard so you can paste it somewhere else. As an example, in context here, if I had this classic electric piano again, and I want it to be at the beginning of my song, well, I could do multiple things. So I could do Option, click, and drag and make a copy like that. But then I have it here as well, right? So if I don't want that to happen, I want it to be removed from this chorus and only in the intro, well, I could just click and drag it over like this. But there is another way. You can actually just if you want to do it all on your keyboard, just highlight, do Command X. Now it's in your clipboard, and then you can do Command V wherever you want it. Same thing with all these. If I wanted out of this chorus, Command X, and now I want it over here, bar 69, Command V. Actually, something I missed when I was talking about joining regions again with Command J in the previous tip is you can also actually highlight multiple tracks and do Command J. Notice what's going to happen. GarageBand is going to ask me if I want a mix down of these audio regions. I'm not going to do this right now, but essentially what this is saying is it's going to take all those three tracks and just make it one track. And you can either make it a stereo track or a mono track. So very helpful sometimes if you have like a stack of harmonies that you've already mixed and you want it just one track, you can highlight them all, do Command J, and then create that stereo mix down. So you end up having one audio file which includes everything instead of like multiple tracks. This area of discussion is also like opening up the topic of stems and mixing with stems other than mixing with like specific tracks of everything. So I'm not going to open up that, go down that rabbit hole. Tip number 41 inside editing is to make sure whenever you're dealing with audio tracks, not so much with MIDI, audio specifically, you're going to want to make sure to cut out the dead space where there is no content. And it's great to do in a vocal. So if I solo out this vocal, and I'll just highlight it and do Command J to have one track. So there's a lot of space, like at the beginning here. I'm not singing. So this could be an opportunity for you to just cut that dead space out. So Command T and cutting this out. This all comes down to after you record something and you're editing something. You want to make sure to cut out the dead space in between the words, unless it's not distracting. Like, you don't have to do it for everything, but what sometimes happens is when you record audio and you start adding a lot of effects and compression, it starts raising the volume of the whole track. So even the room noise or your vocal can start becoming distracting because of the noise around the room that your mic was picking up. So it helps to remove all that dead space, and you can do that with guitars, with pianos, anything that you record audio with. Tip number 42 is naming tracks. So you notice how all my tracks are nicely named. I like to do capitals. That's just how I was taught. But also the regions are named specifically too. When we added our Steinway grand piano track, though, it was first an classic electric piano, right? But when we opened up the library with Y and chose like something different, let's do a synthesizer analog stack synth, it still has the name classic electric piano. So this tip is changing the track name and the shortcut to change the region name. So if I'm on the track itself, analog synth, if I just go Shift Enter, I can quickly change the name of this, and I might just say synth. Then I could go down to harmonies, do Shift Enter again, and just to say like Vox Harm, or down Shift Enter. It's just going to highlight the track name instead of double clicking in and changing it. Okay, going back to our synth, if we want to change the name here, we just have to do Shift N, and that highlights this. So we can now call this synth verse. This is going to be really helpful when you're starting to get organized with the tracks when you're ready to mix. You definitely want to properly name things. So tip number 42, Shift Enter to rename the track. And then tip number 43, Shift N to rename the region. So lead vocal, let's just say, lead, or not keyed, not loud, lead. Tip number 44, on the topic of organization in editing, colors. So I always have my drums red, and I always have my vocals being this kind of color of pink, and then everything else is whatever I want to choose that day. To bring up colors, you do Option C, and then you have this little color box you can go around. With GarageBand, you cannot color specific regions separately. So if I wanted this last chorus drums to be a blue, I couldn't actually have that. It's only the track itself. If you wanted to start from scratch and just highlight everything and go blue, you can't do that either. It's just based on what track you're on. A little bit of a limitation in terms of colors, but at least focus on coloring your tracks, because at the beginning, when you add new audio tracks, they'll always be default blue. Or when you add new software instrument tracks like this one, they'll always be default green. Or drummer tracks, always default yellow. As you begin to have more tracks, it's helpful to bring up Option C, color box, and start recoloring tracks. Tip number 45 is using Option spacebar to preview specific regions and selected regions, actually. So let me just close the library down by pressing Y, and let's remove the N marker in a little bit to have the proper zooming. Let's say I want to only focus in on the BVs for the last chorus. All I have to do without moving the playhead or anything is just select the region you want to listen to, then do Option spacebar, and it automatically loops this specific section. So I don't have to go over, solo it, loop it. That would be the alternative, right? All I have to do, nothing needs to be soloed. Only the region needs to be clicked of what you want to preview for the keys, Option spacebar. Tip number 46 is snap to grid. This is going to save you lots of headaches when you're editing, And it lives in the edit window. If it's to turn it on and off, edit snap to grids. Like you have the grid here, right? Which is the gray stuff behind it and the lines and your bars, like the whole musical structure of your song. So if we have this synth here, the synth region, let's zoom in on this. And like the idea of snapping to grid is based on regions. And notice how I'm moving this region to bar 16. What that means is it will snap it to bar 16. So I can be rest assured that like I know that that region is now starting on bar 16. So in context, like if I'm moving regions around and I know my chorus starts at bar 17, I want to make sure that this synth region also is starting on bar 17. And with snap to grid, I know for a fact that that's going to happen because it's snapping it to the grid. If it was off, and sometimes it's also helpful to have it off because you have more fine tuning, and I'll show you that right now. So if that's off, notice when I get it close to bar 17, it's not snapping it to bar 17, right? Now watch as I zoom in. It's still a little bit off, but I have the flexibility now to really dial in if I just want it to be a little bit delayed after bar 17. I can do that now, which is something you might want to do sometimes if you want to delay specific elements in like a drum set, for example, like hi-hats. It's often nice to delay those a little bit to set it in the beat a little more. I usually have it on all the time by default. And then if I want to get very specific on things, I zoom in heavily and then I take off snap to grid and then just go about it that way. Tip number 47 is flex time in GarageBand. This can be a topic that might be confusing if you're just a beginner in GarageBand, so stick with me on this one. It is located in the editor window. In context, let's say at around bar 17, we're going to focus on the keys. So I'll press E to open up my editor, and now I can get this big view of the audio signal. So just take a listen. Okay, flex time is located in the top left. You just press this and it's going to analyze the audio track and give you this grayed out type of view. When you have this view on, you can now actually manipulate and move the audio signal. So if I wanted this piece to start earlier, I can click in. And now I have these two white lines, right? So I have my playhead over here. I'm just going to move that out of the way. And now I have these two white lines. So I can just zoom in a bit. I'm just pinch zooming on my trackpad. And now I can actually move the audio signal to start. Let's say it was a little delayed. I wanted to start over here. And I can also bring that whole other side down. So I'm moving actually where that's being played. Now, here's the thing. The more you move audio, and we can get out of flex time and just open it back up by pressing it, and our changes will still be there. So we can have a listen. So now it's just actually being played before. The quality is still there because we didn't really we didn't break up the pattern. The quality is going to start changing when you stretch the audio and when you break the pattern up. So let's say like if we move these back to its original position here, now this is going to sound a bit weird. But actually it doesn't sound that bad, to be honest. It's going to start sounding bad when you start stretching audio. So notice when I actually stretch this piece. How like that sounds bad, right? Because we're actually we're stretching that chord, and when you do that to audio, it starts sounding bad. Why would you ever want to come in here and fix this kind of stuff? I do it sometimes when you play something wrong, you're recording a vocal even, or you're recording guitar, and you just happen to play something that's not in time. So this chord, for example, if it's not in time, you could push it forward or you could push it back. The other way to do this, if you don't want to do it in flex time, is you can technically get out of flex time, go over to your playhead, cut with Command T, making cuts, and actually moving the regions. So now I have this separate region, right? I can click in and actually move the whole region. So if I thought that this was sounding better on like a little bit after, I could just move it over. So you have options. You don't have to do it in flex time. Sometimes you can, but you can also do it by just cutting regions. Let's get to tip 48, which is quantizing audio in GarageBand. So we just flirted with the idea of quantization, and quantization means you can think of it like putting things in time, and music really revolves around timing. So if we're staying on this example of the keys, let's just open up the editor again by pressing E. And we don't have to go in quantize, we don't have to go into flex time here. You'll notice we have time quantize. It's by default off. And you can go down here and we have these notes. So I'm going to just quickly explain quantization. I'm not going to go deep on it because then I don't want to extend this video too much in explanation. I have other videos on quantization if you need to know more about it. But watch what happens when I choose like an eighth note. Things shift, right? Like there's an algorithm behind there that just took the audio signal and made things land on eighth notes. So let's backtrack a bit. Let's go back to off because you can always revert it by just going off and nothing will happen. So let's just focus on these notes here, and let's not get into anything below that. So whole notes, 1/1, half notes, 1/2, quarter notes, 1/4, 1/8, 1/16. These are values, note values, musical note values. So whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, 16th notes. They happen to do with these, the grid actually. If we're gonna get a bit technical here, I'm gonna zoom in, and you'll notice like these little ticks on the top. So these note values here, they live within bars of music. So notice if I just zoom out in the editor, I have bar, and I'm going to cycle at bar 17 and 18, just so you can focus in on one bar of music, which is a whole note, one whole bar. A half note would be 1/2 of the bar. A quarter note would be, 4 quarters in one bar. An eighth note would be 8 notes in one bar. A 16th note would be 16 notes in one bar. So it's helpful to quantize audio and talk about these note values because you can say things like, I want this audio to be quantized to the nearest X value. So to the nearest whole note or to the nearest eighth note, 16th note, quarter note. I know this is confusing if it's the first time you're hearing about this. And if it's not, maybe this has clicked something in your head to understand it. And I'll show you right now, and I'll quantize to the nearest eighth note. And notice how this snapped to the nearest eighth note. This little tick up here is an eighth note. So now you might be asking yourself, why would I ever want to use this? I recommend using this if you know the note values and you're playing, for example, a rhythm, a shaker or a guitar rhythm with 16th notes or eighth notes, and you just need to like shift your timing a little bit. The audio quantization algorithm in Logic here, this drop down, can shift your recording in time without really messing up with the audio signal. This isn't like a perfect lifesaver. Like you can't just play something sloppy, quantize it, and it will sound good, like you can do with MIDI. And I'll show you that in the next tip. So using quantization with audio is a slippery slope if you're not already playing in time. So let's move on from quantizing audio and talk about quantizing MIDI, which is much more flexible, and you can play something very sloppy and still quantize it perfectly. I'm just going to play something very quickly and record it in. And I'm just going to try to play in time with the metronome with this synth. So I'm just going to press R and record something at bar 17. That is very 80s big synth sound. Okay, let's work with it. Open up our editor and notice how my playing is before the beat. And I can see that visually because if you don't see this, just notice that a lot of these notes, these green notes, are before the bar. So the 17, this chord is being played before bar 17. Same thing with this chord here. Same thing with these notes. So that isn't a good thing to have in music because it can sometimes feel awkward. It can feel rushed if the player is playing before the beat. This is what you would say. Now, the easiest way to quantize MIDI is just to highlight everything with Command A and go over here. We have the same note values. What I recommend is to start at a 16th note. That usually will move things in time if you're already playing, and it has more or less put things in the right time. Now, the thing is, which is great with MIDI, is it's all going to sound good no matter what, and you can always move up note values to find the right quantization with it, the right way, how you played it. So for me, it's actually an 8th note, and this is what I want it to sound like. And that's perfectly in time with our rhythm. Now, if I quantized it by a whole note, watch what happens. Everything snaps to the whole note on the bar 17, 18, 19, or 20. Sounds bad, right? Like, if you're totally new to quantization, just cycle through the note values, find out which one you like and which one works with the style of what you played it at. And for me, it's an 8th note because I likely played nearest to the 8th note. Watch the other videos I have on quantization if you want to really know it. I go deeper and I talk about it at a much slower teaching style. Let's move on to tip 50 and talk about comping vocals. So this is you're going to want to comp vocals when you are mixing or recording music. And that essentially means like doing multiple takes of a vocal track and then choosing the best takes of all your takes. Let's take an example and go back to our chorus here at bar 17 of the lead vocal. The idea would be you want to now record multiple takes over this chorus part. So let's do that with the microphone that I have plugged in here. I'll unsolo it. I'll mute our crazy 80s synth, and I'll just record ideas over bar 18 here. Notice now what has happened. There's 2 takes in here, and I have a number 1 here. I'm going to do another take over top of here by pressing R again, and it's just recording more information on this vocal track that's right here. But I can't read your mind. I don't know why you're still high. Now it has 3 takes, so I can keep going. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever. And I can go over to my number 1 here and filter through each take. The idea here is to do multiple takes and record over the same track. And when you have done that, you now go section by section. So for this specific one, we recorded from bar 17 to bar just over bar 19. So what I'm going to do is make a cut here, Command T, and then I'm going to go over to just after bar 19, and I'm going to make a cut here. So I now have in this specific region also take 1, 2, and 3. Look, I can have take 3 in this region, but over in this region, I can have take 1. I am like choosing the best takes in every specific region. You can get really fine-tuned because you can totally zoom in more and make a cut here just on this word. If I solo it here. Bruise on your pride. Like bruise on your pride. That's the lyric. Bruise on your pride. So I can, if I don't like that, how I sung it, I could cycle at the top or put my playhead there and record bruise on your pride a few more times, and then choose the best take going through the takes because they'll show up here. So that's comping vocals with take folders in GarageBand, something I really recommend doing to get the best vocal take that you can have. Let's move on to tip 51 and talk more about the MIDI editor and specifically velocity changes. So let's go back to our synth and solo out our 80s synth here and open up the editor window again by pressing E. Velocity, if you haven't heard of velocity anymore, you can think of it as like the strength that you hit a note. So whether you're playing guitar or a keyboard, there's velocity in your playing. If you slam on the keyboard with your hands really hard, that's a high velocity. If you are just playing softly, that's a low velocity. The velocity is how long, not the green note is, but how long the white thing in the green note is. And I'm going to zoom in so you can really see that. See how there's like a green note? But in the middle of it, there's like another white note. That's the strength of velocity, because you can see this one is a bit bigger. This one is a bit smaller. So you want to have the velocities to be a bit different. If they were all maxed out, it would sound really bad. And this is really helpful if you're not playing. Like I played this on the keyboard, so it's taking the velocity that I actually played it on the keyboard. So if you want to increase or decrease velocity, you can do it one note at a time or groups of notes. So you can take this group chord and increase the velocity relatively. So notice that you can see the lines going right, left to right, but they're changing relatively. They're not all the same. Another little added tip on this one, and getting a little more technical, is if you want, for example, if this note at the top was a very high velocity and this was a very low velocity, meaning very soft, if you wanted, you're like, hey, I actually want all the notes velocity to be the same, which sometimes you might want to do that when you're working with MIDI. What you do is highlight them all, hold Shift Option, and then go over to the velocity slider, and they'll all become the same once you click on the velocity slider. Now they're all the same. So just think, change velocity when you have accidentally played a note too hard on your keyboard or anything on your MIDI controller, because I often hear like a big beginner mistake is in your MIDI tracks, they sound too harsh or just too dynamic, where there's like one note that the velocity is just too high. So go into your editor and just do it one at a time, like shaping the velocities a little bit so they're not all the same unless you want it, but that there is a nice dynamic of velocities between each note. Let's move on to tip 52 now, where we're staying on MIDI. Similar to velocity, this is the topic of how can we make MIDI notes sound more human? Because when we start to quantize notes, as you saw in the tip before that, it starts sounding a little machine-like because everything is so rigid. And you know what? After listening to this 80s synth sound a bit much, I'm going to open up the library and just change this maybe to a piano just to keep it basic. Have a listen to what it is right now. A little bit harsh, a little bit choppy, not very fun to listen to, right? So the first thing we can do is we need to add sustain to this because it wasn't played with a sustain pedal. So you can open up automation again within the editor by pressing A. You can also get to it by this icon here. It's the same thing by pressing A. And we can go over here to sustain in the dropdown. And now we have a new blank area where we just click in. And then we have this bar, which is our sustain. And I'm talking about a sustain pedal that you would typically have on a piano that sustains the notes. So I will just add a sustain note after every chord, meaning that whenever this bar is up top, it sustains the note. Whenever it's down at the bottom here, it lets go. So I want to sustain this first note, and then I want to bring it back up. Then I want to sustain it down again, and then I want to bring it back up. So that's all I'm going to do to add sustain just to keep things moving. But sustain is one thing that's going to help a piano out a lot. The next thing, the biggest thing, is velocity, which we touched on. So making sure that each velocity note is none is like really popping out or sounds harsh. So I'm just going to press C to play it at bar 17. This low one might be a little loud. That sounds much better. I might just get rid of that chord in general, move this chord over, extend the notes like this. Now, what else can we do? Well, think of it. When a human is playing the piano or any type of instrument, it's not very mechanical like this, meaning everything doesn't fall so rigidly. So you can zoom in a little bit. Let's go to bar 17. Place the notes a little bit differently. Just moving them off the grid a little bit. Just by doing that, and then doing that to every single chord a little bit, is going to make it, and it doesn't have to be everyone, like maybe a little bit here or there. This is how a human would technically play it. And when you zoom out, it doesn't actually look too bad, right? But when we zoom in, notice that some are off the grid a little bit. That's how a human would play it. Now, another way to take this further is changing the chord progressions a little bit, like adding a seventh note or adding an inversion in a chord. And you can do that by clicking any note and moving it down or up 12 semitones. So this chord in bar 18. Actually, let's do bar 17 because it's a longer chord. So this chord, I can take this the top note here, and move it down 12 semitones by holding Shift, Option, down arrow. So that's the same note, it's just different octave. And if it's the same note, then it's the same chord, but just this is called an inversion. So it sounds different. Take a listen to like what this sounds like. And now I'm gonna drop this down 12 semitones. Very different, right? I could do the same for both these ones. Maybe I can leave the last one as is. Drop the velocity a little bit. I might add a bass note here. So what I'll do is I did a little bit of step ahead. I'm holding Command, and this changes your pencil tool into your cursor tool into a pencil. Just hold Command, click in. Now I have a note. I can extend it if I want. I'm going to move it up to that same note we already have, but then do Shift Option down. So now I have the bass note, a lower note of the same one. So it sounds just more rich. See, with the bass note, without. So it's nice to have that depth to kind of hold the note. So now after doing just some timing changes, some velocity changes, some chord changes, we have this nice sound. So that's it for editing, and there's going to be some tips and tricks and shortcuts in this video that you might think should be in other categories. Probably true, that's right. There's a lot of these things that are used for producing / editing and recording, but I tried my best to keep it organized as much as I could. So let's move on to the next category, which is producing. Tip 53 is when we are producing, I like to produce with arrangement markers so I know where the sections are in my song. Let's say you're writing a song and you're not familiar with the structure yet. What we can do is actually go to Track and Show Arrangement Track. Notice the shortcut Shift Command A. So Shift Command A. And we have an arrangement track. So what I can do is, no matter where your playhead is, just click plus, and we can start adding arrangement markers. So this is an intro, and our intro only goes for about this long. Then we have a verse. Bird's eye view, we can visualize where the pieces are to our song. If I don't want to see that, I can go Shift Command A again and have that disappear, but I can also get it back. Shift Command A and just leave it there. One step further, and this is you can actually color these as well. They're separate colors. So I can do Option C, right, to bring up our color box. Let's say I want the final chorus to be this dark blue, and I want the verses to be a yellow. Now we can visualize the markers much better when they're up there, and you can change. That's not a great color scheme that I chose. So you can change different colors just by Option C, to get the color box up, and then Option C to take it away. Let's move on to tip 54, where I want to talk about arrangement tips. So we'll talk about how I arrange this from a production perspective and songwriting perspective, so you can get an idea if you're coming at a beginner level of how you can structure a song. So we have an intro here, right? Just instrumental intro. The first one starts right here. 4-bar intro. There's this little guitar lick that starts, and then we start on beat 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So this song has a 4-bar intro, an 8-bar verse, a 4-bar pre-chorus, and then an 8-bar chorus. So that's one standard to do, because notice how the dynamic change between this verse and this pre-chorus, just having a little bit of a change melodically before the chorus is really going to help your chorus pop out more, and it's going to keep the listener engaged. Have a listen to the melodic changes and the space that this pre-chorus gives before the chorus comes in.
We lost, we can beat it if you want to. Oh wait, was it something I said, or was it all in my head? But I can't read your mind.
That was my other take. That's so funny that I did over here. Let's go back to take 1.
But I can't read
sounds
your
better.
mind. I don't know why you still hide. Can you give me a little?
So 8-bar chorus, back into a long verse, 8-bar verse, and a 4-bar pre-chorus here. So same structure. The arrangement here of mirroring the first part about your song. Your listener is already prepared for the second part. So you're not having to ask too much of your listener that they have to now consume a full different melodic structure in the second part. It's nice to keep it the same.
But I can't.
8-bar chorus, and then a new, somewhere different to go for the bridge, which is around here.
Good side,
So instrumentally, it changes.
good side. Let it out. There's nothing.
New palette here of 8 bars to give the listener new information before coming back to the final chorus, where they're very familiar with because they've listened to the chorus 2 times before that already. This is a structure that's going to work well for the broad audience, and it's kind of in that field that really works. People really like this kind of stuff because it's what works, right? You don't have to do this. You can completely go and do a very different structure, go crazy, but it's not going to be, it's not necessarily going to work for everyone. It might only be very niche for someone. So if you want to hit a broad market, then you would do a structure like this. Let's move on to tip number 55, which is alignment guides in GarageBand. We can turn on or off alignment guides in the edit window. Edit alignment guides just under the snap to grid, which we talked about. So alignment guides is on right now. If we turn that on, it's likely off by default for you. You can go and turn it on, and I'll show you what the difference is now. So if we want to move our synth over to this other MIDI region, what alignment guides is going to do is it's going to give you 2 bars on the side of each region so you know where you're aligning your region. So we can go back up to edit and turn it on. Now when I move this over, just notice the bar, that yellow bar that pops up right before this other region here comes down this middle. That's just telling you that, hey, you lined it up properly. It's right next to that region. Tip number 56 is holding command. We already saw this when we were working on this piano here, and we can rename that by just going, what is it? Yeah, Shift N. And this changes the name. This is now a piano track. So press E and open up this region here. One thing you can do, we already saw, if you hold command, it changes your cursor to a pencil. And now you can add notes with that. So same thing. Let's close the editor down, press E. Same thing in this window, the session window. I'm going to add the 3 different types of tracks. So I'm going to add Option Command A for audio, Option Command U for drummer, and Option Command S for software. I'm going to delete the yellow thing for now. So when I hold command in the session window, it also changes to a pencil and it inputs a green region for me on software tracks. I can also do it for drummer tracks like this Bluebird. I can hold Command and input a drummer. And for audio tracks too, but it's different for audio. When I click it here, it opens a Finder window where you can go and actually find the audio track you want to input in this specific thing. So going back to the earlier tip in this video, if we don't actually want to drag in tracks, we can just hold Command in an audio and import it that way as well. Tip number 57, let's talk about dragging MIDI and recycling MIDI. So backtracking, if you're just a beginner, MIDI is this green data that we've talked about in the piano track here, right? And I'll just delete these regions and I'll actually delete these tracks here quickly by doing Command backspace. This is the idea of MIDI is these, and I'm opening up my editor, these notes are not piano notes technically. I know they sound like a piano, but these are just MIDI. Just think of them as blocks. When you have that idea, they're just building blocks. This could be a piano sound. This could be a synth sound. This could be a drum sound. This could be a vocal sound. It doesn't matter. So when you have the pattern you like of MIDI, for example, we like this pattern, let's say. We really like this chord progression we made. Now that we have that pattern, we can add another software instrument with the same pattern. So let's drag this over here to the beginning. Solo it out by S. Let's rename this track. Let's go Shift Enter and say piano. One thing to notice here before I go on are these the vertical gray bars. Those are the sustain notes that we added previously as well. I didn't point that out earlier, but it's good to know just visually. A production hack or technique here that you would do is recycling MIDI patterns that layer tracks. So I like this pattern, let's say, but I want it to fill it out to add a bit more depth. So let's add a different pad, a synth pad sound underneath it. So what I would do in this circumstance would be I do Command D to duplicate this piano track. I'd go Shift Enter and just say synth pad. I'd open up my library by pressing Y, and then I'd search now for a pad sound under synthesizer, pad. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this MIDI and just move it down. But I know the shortcut to make copies quickly is holding Option, clicking, and dragging down. So just like we did like copies to the left and right, we can actually do them vertically as well. Just going to delete this one. I can rename this Shift N to synth. And then I'm going to go search in my library for a synth sound. So open up Y, synthesizer, pad, and choose any of these pad sounds I want. For example, Eighth Wonder. And it has the same pattern. But notice that it sounds really low, right? And that's okay. We can, if we quickly want to take all that chord progression that we took from the piano, we can just raise it up a whole octave by doing Shift, Option, up, and we just increased it by 12 semitones. So all I did was I clicked on this region and it did Shift, Option, up. Taking this a little step further, I can open up my editor. I'm going to Automation, pressing A, and I can remove those sustain notes because I don't really want a synthesizer to sustain. And press E. And now I can lower the volume and mix it in with my piano. Giving us a lot more depth, right, with that piano sound. And we did that very, very quickly. Like once you get to know the shortcuts, I just deleted that. It's as simple as doing Command D, clicking down, Shift, Option, up arrow, opening up the library, going over to a pad sound, and then you have it. So once your muscle memory is built in with these shortcuts, and I know I went fast there and I'm not trying to prove anything, but it's just the idea that when these things are built into your hands, you're really going to start making music very quickly. Tip number 58 is taking advantage of the arpeggiator that is built in to GarageBand. Arpeggiator lives in the controls window. So if I press B, which is this gear window, right? It's over on the right here. It's this little kind of pyramid. and then it opens this little drop down. That's all it does. But the drop down, these are just patterns. These are arpeggiated patterns. If I click an arpeggiated pattern, let's get something simple like a rate of 1/8, and you're just going to hear what this sounds like for the piano. It's going to sound very different. I didn't play that, right? I just chose the arpeggiator and that did it for me. I can also choose all of these different styles, arcade trills. Like how cool is that? I didn't do anything. I'm just choosing these things. What's happening behind the scenes is it's taking these chords that I played, using the notes in those chords to make something more dynamic, something more exciting. Taking that a step further, again, remember MIDI notes here, they're not attached to any type of instrument, right? So you can always go over to the piano and change the instrument to a synthesizer, plucked synth. Let's go over to the arpeggiator. I'm just going to try my own style. I'll go a note order of up, a rate of an eighth note, an octave range of 1. See what that sounds like. And if we want to be faster, we do a faster rate, so a 16th note. And then that's just a vibe, right? So we can add a drum track right away by going Option Command U. And now we have a drum track here where the drums are in time with this. I'm just having some fun with that here. The arpeggiator will help you break outside that box if you're feeling a little bit static and you're not getting any spark to an idea. You find your chord progression is a little dull. Put the arpeggiator on in the controls window and try your own by doing note order, rate, and octave range, or try the many different options here that you have. Number 59 is taking yellow drummer tracks and changing them into MIDI tracks. So let's add one drummer track, Option Command U. And now we have this drummer track, right? I don't need all of these drums, so I'm just going to delete these ones and just keep one here. Let's say you find a pattern you like, okay? Let's just say we like this pattern. How do you change that exact pattern to MIDI? You add a software instrument, so Option Command S. Or if you don't want to do the shortcuts to that, just go to track here, new track, and you can add the software instruments here. I recommend getting used to the shortcuts though. The default is a classic electric piano, right? So let's go to our library by pressing Y and go to a drum kit. And let's choose a Bluebird drum kit because that's what we had up here on our drummer track, right? So let's choose Bluebird. And we can rename this, Shift Enter, Bluebird. When I click this yellow region, I do Command C. Then I go over to my playhead, click my new Bluebird track, and do Command V. What we're looking at here is the same drum track. One is yellow drummer tracks from GarageBand, and one is MIDI. I'll play them back to back so you can believe me. Here's the one we designed. Right? And here's the MIDI one now. But with MIDI, we can go in to our editor. We can see what a pattern looks like with MIDI, but we can also change velocities of things. We can if we want to bring all the hi-hat velocities down, we can highlight them all and bring them down. Or if we want to remove some of the hi-hat or open hats, or if we want to increase the velocity of the snare drums, or move notes around like we were doing to humanize velocities too, right? We can move some notes around. Plus, on top of that, we can go to our library and go to any other type of drum track. So Liverpool is going to sound a bit different. And I can just filter through some down here. Right? That sounds cool. You can also go to an electronic drum kit, 808 Flex. Big room. I want to tack onto this tip for the more intermediate advanced GarageBand user. Stay with me if you're just a beginner. The idea and the benefit of breaking out your drum tracks from yellow into MIDI is now we can take it a step further and have every drum element, like a kick drum, a snare drum, and hi-hats, for example. We can have those three things on their separate tracks. So if I take this track and go back to my Bluebird, or I liked the Neo Soul was really cool. So stay with me here. I'm going to duplicate this track 2 times. 1, 2. I'm going to rename this kick. I'm going to go down, do Shift Enter to rename this one, snare, down arrow, Shift, and then say hats. So I can go to my MIDI, open up my editor, find my kick drum by just clicking on it and listening to it, right? This was the kick drum here. So that means I'm going to take everything else and remove it by doing Command X and bring it down. So we have the rest of our drum elements in our clipboard, and now all we have in here is the kick drum. So we need to bring those other elements into a MIDI region, right? Well, we know how to make a MIDI region in this window now. The tip before, holding Command and Enter, right? There's one. And here's another one. Holding Command to pencil, we have another one. So I will double click into my snare or press E and paste the rest of the MIDI notes. We just want the snare in there. And we'll take these. Actually, we'll just bring the hats. Command X, closing the editor down, going over here, pressing E again, and then Command V. So, I actually did that wrong. So I'm going to just put that over here and bring it back. So now I have kick, snare, and hats. I can solo my hats and have the flexibility to change the volume just for my hats. And I can mix in the snare and then the kick drum. So that's more an intermediate advanced thing. Get used to that style of thinking to separate those drum elements so you can have more flexibility to design the sound of them. Tip number 60 is using the brace brackets to filter through presets in the library window. So let's take the example of our piano up here. I don't even know if it's a piano anymore. We've changed it so many times. Right, it's this pluck thingy. So I can go over and click pluck, but I don't have to use my mouse to click through them and press play. I can just use the brace brackets. The left brace is going up, filtering up through the presets, and then the right brace is going down and just filtering down through the presets. Tip 61 is leveraging the loop library to supplement different sounds in your songs. So open up the loop library by pressing O. And notice the filters here. We have instrument filters, we have genre filters, and we have descriptors. But we also have scale, like minor or major. And then you have the search function if you know the name of a loop. Inside the loop library, there's audio tracks, which are blue. There's MIDI tracks. So like, for example, this 16mm electric piano is MIDI, right? Just like we made our MIDI track up here, we can actually take MIDI from the loop library. And like I was saying, MIDI is disconnected to the instrument. So you can go over to your library and choose another type of instrument using the MIDI pattern that is given to you in the loop library. Like, look at all these MIDI chord progressions that we have here. There's hundreds. All these are MIDI tracks that you can use. For example, let's listen to this electric piano. Like, that's a sophisticated chord progression. See, we can go into the editor and take a look at that. Like, that's cool. But if we didn't like the ending part, let's just delete it. Now we don't have to listen to it. Or if we don't like a lot of the busyness in there, just deleting notes. That's a bit more simple. Or maybe we just want this. And let's say we don't actually like the sound anymore. Open up the library. Let's go to a vintage clav and do a muted clav. Actually, that doesn't sound good either. Let's go to the 70s clav. So now we have our own sound. We've added the MIDI. So lots of opportunity in the loop library here. Same thing goes for drummer tracks. So we have yellow drummer tracks where we can customize the sound. And again, now you can take this drummer track, Portland, and change it into MIDI. So take some time to get familiar with the loop library. Like there's so much to offer in here. On top of the little filter buttons, just take a look. Like there's 14,000 items here that are available. And if they're grayed out, you can also download them with this download button. Also, you can look up with loop packs. Like if you have a genre in your like Ultimate 80s, here we go. All of these sounds, which I actually haven't even downloaded, but packs that are ready for you to use. Number 62 is on loops as well. Like you notice at the beginning of this video, I was talking about setting your foundation with your key. So if we are in C major, which is the key here, that means every loop that we drag in is going to be in C major, right? But the thing is, when you do that to audio too much, when we were talking about flex time, like when we stretch audio or transpose audio, it can start sounding a bit wonky. So in the GarageBand preferences, by opening up Command comma, you can go to loops and you can do keyword browsing filter for more relevant results. Limit search to loops that are within 2 semitones of a project key. You're going to have a better chance of finding sounds that sound better in the loop library. I wouldn't necessarily limit yourself unless you're trying to find a very key part of the song, like in a very important part of the song. But if it's just a background thing or an effect or something, don't necessarily limit yourself all the time, because if it's not a really important sound, like if it's just happening quickly in your song, then it doesn't really matter if it can sound wonky, because you can turn it down in volume. And you can also have inside here the ability to display the original tempo and key. So if I click this on, you'll notice that the tempo and key are now in the song. 63 is making your own samples in a way, adding your own regions to the loop library. So if you like a specific part in your song that you think you might want to reuse, so maybe it can be anything audio, anything MIDI as well, and anything drummer track. As an example, let's say I like this guitar part this keys part that we were working on earlier. We can add this whole region to the loop library so we can reuse in other GarageBand projects. How we do that is Control-Shift-O. And that's going to bring up this window. We can also get to it by going to File, and you see how it's Control-Shift-O. It's not available to click because I don't have a region clicked. So click that region again, go down here, Control-Shift-O, and now we can name it. So it's like a keys synth thing. And I'm going to put it in keyboards, synths, and I'll just make it. You don't have to put this stuff, but I'll just say cheerful, okay? And create. I can be in a completely different GarageBand project and go to my loop library by pressing O. I can search for it in the descriptors because I know I tagged it as cheerful, but I can also just quickly go here under loop packs, my loops, and I have the key synth here. Drag it in. Tip number 64 is kind of like when we use the arpeggiator. When you're making a song and working on a sound where you think it's a bit dull, a bit static, what are some things you can do to get out of that box? And a thing you can do, let me just continue cleaning this up a little bit, is using some different plugins. I haven't talked about where plugins are yet in this video. So if you're a beginner, let's just go find those first. So plugins are located at the bottom here, bottom left, and there's a little arrow, and we can just make this window bigger so you can see. And these little blue things are plugins. I don't want to dive too deep on this, but what I'm going to just recommend here is go to this little gray area. If you want to spice things up, you can click here and go to the section modulation or filters. So these are just going to mess with the sound a little bit. So specifically, sorry, with modulation, a lot of these things are going to mess with the imaging of the sound, so it can make it wider. For example, it can make the sound bounce as well. So like a tremolo will make this piano bouncy, kind of bounce between the speakers. In the arpeggiator, we had a drop-down list of options. We have the same in every plugin, this window that just opened up. So let's turn that tremolo off by just turning the off button. And let's go to something else in modulation, like a modulation delay, and go to a drop-down box and just use one of these super chorus. Let's see what that sounds like. And we can also go back to the tremolo and turn both on. And go to filter. I can do an auto filter, go or drop down and just choose something like pulse gate, rise. Let's see what this sounds like. Very different, right? Go to the plugins window, wait for this little blue bar to pop up, click it, then go to filter or modulation. Number 65 is using auto-tune in GarageBand. So typically you would use auto-tune on a vocal track.
I've been trying to get to you. There's something bothering.
So auto-tune lives in the editor window. So by pressing E, and we can see on the left here we have pitch correction. So this is auto-tune. If we put this to 100.
But I can't read your mind. I don't know why you still hide.
Notice how it sounds very auto-tuney without 0.
But I can't read your mind.
No auto-tune. Put this slider to where you want it to, of how you want your vocal to sound. You can also limit it to the key.
But I can't read your mind. I don't know why you still hide.
And what this is doing is it's looking at the key of your project. So back to setting a foundation for your song, choosing the key. That's what that does. Number 66 is a cool little hack trick you can do. Another plugin you can experiment with to really spice up your productions is a noise gate feature. And I use this on a lot of things. I use it on pretty much anything, really. Hi-hats, it sounds cool. Let's try adding the noise gate feature on this drums track here. And it's in the plugins area. So we go to our controls window first by pressing B and go to our plugins drop down. It might be like this for you. Just drop it down. And I'm looking for the dynamics folder and then noise gate. And I like to do it on drums sometimes because it can make the drums sound choppy. And what a noise gate is think of it actually like a gate. You tell it when to open and close. And when it's open, the sound gets through. And when it's closed, the sound doesn't get through. When this slider is all the way to the left, nothing happens. So listen to the drums. And as I begin to move the sliders to the right, you're going to notice the sound starts to chain. It's going to close up the gate a little bit. Even that is a cool effect. It lets a lot more sound through when it's off. When it's on, it kind of tightens things up and can make it a very cool dynamic change in songs. So a little cool hack that you might want to try using on some things. Number 67 is automation. This is a huge topic, really important piece when it comes to making great music. And I'm going to touch on just a volume automation without making a massively long video, because this is a long video on its own as a tutorial for automation. I do have it in my GarageBand videos, so just take a look at that if you want to learn more. So like automation that we touched on in the editor window, we can go in the session window and press A, and we shade out all the tracks, and it looks like this. So you might have accidentally got here before if you happen to just accidentally press A on your keyboard. By default, we can add a volume automation by choosing it from this drop-down list. This drop-down list is kind of saying like, hey, click on the thing that you want to automate. For our case, it's by default volume, and that's what I want to show in this example. And automation allows us to program something in that can happen automatically over time. For example, I want this piano track here to increase in volume over time from bar 17 to bar 20. And how do I do it? All I do is click in, and now I can control the volume with this line. So notice this fader over here going left and right. I just have to draw the automation by clicking dots. Click a dot here, click a dot at the end, move the dot at the end up, and now the volume increases over time. If I just solo at the piano and press play, you'll notice that. So you watch another example, I can go up here and then back down. And let's just change that instrument again because it sounds terrible. I know it sounds terrible because in a couple tips before we put those plugins on it so I can open up my controls window and just turn off those filters and modulation. Now have a listen to the piano get loud in the middle and then come down softly. So you see how you can get creative with making things pop out in volume throughout your song. 68 is doing a little bit more automation on the same track. And then how do you delete all this automation? On this piano track, I have a volume automation, but I can also add, for example, a pan automation. Panning is when you move something to the left stereo or to the right, sorry, not stereo, the left speaker or the right speaker. So if I now see how it says pan, click in again, make some dots. I want it to start in the middle. When it gets to the middle of the piano, I want it to be on the left side. And then when it gets to the end, I want it to be on the right side. So have a listen, like if you're on headphones or if you're listening on speakers, and watch the piano kind of bounce back and forth. That made me sound a little bit dizzy, and you wouldn't maybe want to go as dramatic as that, but you can fine tune how you want that piano to bounce back and forth between the speakers. And you can add many more types of automation. You can always see what automation you have on the track by going to this drop down and the last category here, used. So we have a volume automation that we've done, and now we have a pan automation that we've done. Whenever you want to delete things and start from scratch, just right click and say delete all automation. Number 69 is attaching the automation to the region. So when you copy the region to another section of your song, it carries over. And let's say I want to move this piano region. I want to make a copy of it over to this part of the chorus happening right here. So let's do that. Let's make a copy, holding Option, clicking, dragging over. Now notice though, when I press A, this region doesn't have that volume automation. It also doesn't have this panning automation. See, this region here doesn't have what I did, and I want that to happen. Let's do that again and turn that on. So go up to the top, mix, and say move track automation with regions. So now that that's on, we hold Option, make a copy, move it over here, press A, and now here's the pan automation, and here's the volume automation. Number 70 is still in the realm of automation, but getting more deep into automation in the editor window, which we briefly discussed on tips before. So I can go double in on this MIDI track again, piano MIDI track that we made, opening up our editor and pressing A. So this is the automation we built with the sustain pedal, right? We kind of emulated what a sustain pedal would look like. Notice on this dropdown, we have also more things we can automate. We can automate the modulation, pitch bend, the velocity, all these things. I'm not going to get into each one if some of these sound foreign to you. We can take a look at pitch bend, which is an interesting one. Pitch bend, I click in. Let me just draw something in here, and then you're going to hear it, and then I'll discuss it. So this will be just very dramatic for you to hear. Right, change the pitch and everything. With the pitch change, it bounces a bit more too. If I want to delete the pitch bend, just highlight it and backspace. Notice that we have used sustain, note velocity, and pitch bend. We can go back to note velocity, and this gives us our bird's eye view of our velocity, right? If we find that these are just poking out a little bit too much, we can bring these down and kind of have it a bit more even if we want. So bring these down. Bring these up. So all the stuff we did in the tip before with making MIDI sound more human, now that we're adding automation, notice how much better this sounds and much cooler. So this is how you bring your tracks to life in GarageBand. Number 71 is making some cool atmospheric sounds by reversing an audio track and then adding a lot of reverb. Something that I try out a lot in different productions just to see what's going to happen. I'm just going to highlight all three regions and join them. So Command J, just to have one audio track. First, reverse the entire region. So basically flipping it around. Let's open up the editor and go to, we have two tabs in the editor, track and region. We want to go to the region and reverse playback. So that's going to sound weird now when we play this. So now let's add lots of reverb to really push it back and make it sound a bit more lush. So I'll go to my controls window, to the plugins window. Here are my plugins. I'm going to click and I'm going to look for reverb. And I'm going to go to Space Designer Reverb. So in this Space Designer plugin, I'm going to go to the factory default and drop down and look for large spaces, indoor, outdoor. I'm looking for a really big reverb. So something like a big church or a dome, maybe a palace or a big old church. Let's try this. So notice when I bring the dry output down, that means that the actual, now this is pushing a little bit intermediate again. That means the dry signal of the actual keys of the synth is not being really put into the plugin. It's only going to be the reverb. When you listen to this, you're really only hearing the reverb mostly. Sounds super big, right? And watch now when I add maybe some modulation to it, maybe a tremolo. Starting to sound very cool, something that you could place like behind everything. I could add a bit of chorus, just going to my modulation section, things that are really messing with the sound. Back to modulation. Back to my tremolo. I'm not suggesting to have this as a main thing, but to have this at low volume when you pair it with something else can add a lot of depth and space. That's what I mean by atmospheric sound. So this is one way, a good way to experiment with this. Reverse the sound, make it sound a bit wonky, add a lot of reverb, and experiment with the modulation category. Number 72, there's a trick you can do with reversing specifically crash hits to make sweep sounds that are traditionally used for going into like a chorus to create a lot of suspense. So that comes from a drum set, like a crash sound. So I can add a software instrument, new track, software instrument, go over to my drum kit, just kind of like pushing through here to get to this. Hold Command to get the pencil tool, create a little space here for me to draw in a note, press E. Now I just have to look for a crash hit because in GarageBand you can't see the drum elements in the keyboard. You just have to look to see, actually not look, you have to hear it. So I hold Command, just click something, and I happen to click on a kick drum. So I need to drag up and wait till I hear a crash sound. That sounds pretty crashy to me, more ride probably. That sounds like a crash. Now that we have that crash hit, that's going to be our basis for our foundation for the sweep we're going to build. Here's a little trick. There's not an easy way to convert this to audio in GarageBand, but the quickest way I think is open up a Finder window and have it like over here on the half of the screen, and just go to your downloads folder or whatever folder. Then click your region and just drag it into your downloads folder and let go. And you're going to have the audio file in there for you, Bluebird 2. Now drag it back into GarageBand, and then it's audio instead of MIDI. So you see here, it's just very small, but it's there, right? It's a crash hit. That's step 2, is like to convert it to audio. Now we can go to our editor window and reverse it. Going to region, reverse it. Now from that, it sounds like this. And you can use that to create suspense, to go into a different section. If you want to take it a step even further, open your controls window and add more reverb so it sounds a bit bigger. See how like it tails off a little more? You could also, like we did before, we could add another reverb plugin here. Same reverb, the big old church. See how that extends really nicely and it lasts? Number 73 is the idea of rhythm when you're making a song in GarageBand. When you're building your song, you want to add momentum and rhythm to different sections of your song in GarageBand. Great way in drums to do this is with hi-hats. So take a listen to this neo soul drum kit here. Notice how it has a lot of momentum and rhythm. But there's only 3 things going on in it. And as soon as I take off the hi-hats, notice how slow it now feels. Same pattern. I didn't do anything else but change the hi-hats. Now bringing the hi-hats back in. So this is a simple example of how patterns, this is a 16th note pattern, so it's really fast and it's adding a lot of momentum. You can do this, the same thing with an instrument. You can play 16th notes. What 16th notes mean are it's going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like it's counting 16 times in between every bar. So between bar 17 and 18, the hi-hats are actually being played 16 times. And that 16th note pattern can be played by plucking a guitar or playing it on the keyboard. That idea of adding 16th notes pattern to something will provide a lot of momentum. Number 74, and the last tip in the production category before we get on to the recording category, is to how to quickly fade out your whole song. So let's say, at the end of this song here, you can do that quickly in GarageBand by just going up to Mix, Create Volume Fade Out on Main Output. And what that does is it just popped up an automation for us, right? The grayed out window. And look, it just created a volume automation which you're familiar with right now, and it just fades out the volume. So it sounds like this, going right into it.
Know you more than just your good side. Good side. Good side. I wanna get to know you more than just your good.
Easy is just going to Mix, Create Volume Fade Out on Main Output. Let's move on to the next category now, which is recording with number 75, track header configuration. Every track here has its separate type of configuration, which means you can see what things are on the track. For example, we have the mute button, we have the solo button on the drums here, and we have this thing called input monitoring, which I'll get input into in the next category. So we can right click here, right on drums, and go to configure track header. Also notice the shortcut Option T. So Option T. And then we can take off mute, solo, and input monitoring if we want some cleanliness there. But typically I wouldn't do that. I'd always have these on. And you can also add track lock and record enabled if you want. Track lock would be if you lock the track, you can't move anything anymore. See, I tried to just move this region, but it says this track can't be changed. So if you really like the timing of things and you're worried that you might click around and like move something quickly like that, you can lock the track. Record enabled, which is this white dot, is an option for you to have on the track header as well, but it's not necessary. It is necessary when you're doing multi-track recording, which means if you want to record 2 tracks at a time. So let's say you have a microphone set up and your acoustic guitar and you're wanting to do like a live session, then you're going to want to have track recording enabled on. So you could say, okay, I want to record my vocal and my acoustic guitar, which maybe is down here. And then you would click both of these record enable buttons, and then that gives you the freedom to do multi-track recording in GarageBand. And just look at input monitoring here for a second. Turn on input monitoring to hear the sound from an instrument or microphone while you play and record. So this is helpful when you're recording vocals. For example, if I'm recording vocals into this microphone, I want to hear myself in my headphones, right? So I know I'm playing in time, and so I can actually hear myself. This is the button you click if you want that to happen. If you click this off, then you can be wearing your earphones and you won't hear yourself. Some people like to hear themselves, some people don't. The other option is just to take one headphone off, and then you can hear yourself through like your normal ear, but also have the track in your left ear, for example. The next thing is groove track. I'll get into this in a future tip. Number 76 is the click and drag functionality. You can do it for all track header configurations. So if I have lock on or record enabled on and also groove track, I can click and drag to lock things. I can lock all my tracks at a time, click and drag to unlock them. For record enabled, it actually doesn't work, but for also input monitoring, you can also do that. Number 77. So let's touch on input monitoring. What is this? What is this orange button, right? To get this on, you can just click it, but you can also do Control I. So I for input monitoring. And think of input monitoring as like you can hear whatever sound is being put through the microphone. If I'm singing in the microphone, then I'll be able to hear myself singing in my earphones. So you notice when you put headphones on, it kind of blocks your ears to hear anything, right? So input monitoring gives you my voice is coming through the microphone, going through the wire, through the computer, and then back into my headphones. It's the same thing if I'm recording an acoustic guitar here. I'll be able to hear my guitar in the headphones. If you want to get around that, because what happens when you have input monitoring on is there's this thing called latency, which is just the amount of time it takes for the sound of my voice to go through the microphone, through the wire, into the computer, into GarageBand, out through this wire, and back out through my ears. It's going to take a couple seconds, right? The faster your computer, the better your interface is, the lower latency, the faster it's going to happen. So it means you can kind of hear your voice in real time. What will happen if you have a slow computer, you hear your voice, but it's delayed a little bit, and that can be very distracting. So if that happens, just turn it off and then take another headphone and just take it off your ear, tilt it back so your ear is kind of tilted in so you can just hear yourself, your voice, or the acoustic guitar, what's in the room with your own ear. Tip number 78 is Shift Command M, which is show the master track. So Shift Command M, and notice how this track at the bottom comes up, master track. You can also get here by going up to the top track, hide master track. So you can show it and hide it with Shift Command M. So it's helpful to bring up Shift Command M to have this master track while you're recording, because all these tracks here, like if I'm just scrolling down drums, everything here is going to this one track. And at the end, this is the track that we export. So it's nice to know if your master track is peaking, which means is it starting to distort? Because you want to make sure you're at the right peak value. So it's not super easy to tell this in GarageBand because we don't have any sort of dB metering, dB for decibels. It's only based on color. So notice when I just play this track here, notice the color, right? Mostly yellow, but it's a bit of orange. I'm just going to increase the volume, and I'm going to show you what you don't want it to look like.
Let it out.
see how it's red there? Starting to get red.
Cause I see that you know how.
So I'm introducing a bit of red there. I just want you to take a look at that. If you see, and completely ignore this. If you bring up Shift Command M on GarageBand and you notice your track is full red, you need to go down and turn down your instruments, like turn down all your instruments and level them at a lower amount. This is like flirting with that mastering territory, but it's nice sometimes just to look, because if you're working GarageBand, you're like, why does everything sound so bad? Then it might be because everything is just too loud. So just do Shift Command M, look at the color. If it's red, then bring things down. Number 79, let's talk about the groove track, which I skipped on in track header components. So we know, let's bring up track header components again, Option T, and I'm bringing it up on our drums here. So notice groove track, I'm gonna click this on and just click out. But notice here, it's now given us a star on our drums and then these checkboxes on all other tracks. What I just did there is I told GarageBand, hey, my drums are the groove. And it doesn't have to be your drums. It could be your bass. It could be anything in the song. Then you can choose what instruments you want to groove to that principal groove. So if our drums are the main groove, then we would click our bass to groove with our drums. And we could also click our electric guitar to groove with the drums. We can also click the keys. We could click on anything we want to groove with the drums. And what that's going to do is there's an algorithm in GarageBand that just helps those tracks glue a bit together. Worth trying. If it totally messes up, you can always just take it off. And then you can go Option T again and just get rid of the groove. Number 80 is musical typing. So you can open up musical typing and I'll explain what it is. Just press Command K and it has this like little keyboard. What this is doing is it just changes your computer keyboard into a MIDI controller. So great if you don't have a MIDI controller. I never use this because I have a MIDI controller, but this is very valuable. Actually, I can't say that because sometimes I've been on like the train and I want to just do a bit of mixing and then I realize, oh, I should add a software instrument. I would open up Command K and then I would go and play the instrument. Like notice how I'm playing this piano on my actual computer keyboard. It's a little bit awkward because of the computer keyboard. Number 81 is using the shortcuts K and Shift K. So K and Shift K turn off both of these values at the top. One is a metronome, a click, which we briefly discussed about, and the other 1, 2, 3, 4, also a click. It counts in 4 beats before you record. If you want it to count in a little earlier, you can right click on that and have it count in actually 8 beats or 2 bars before. K turns the metronome on and Shift K turns the 1, 2, 3, 4 on. And you can do this in real time too, like if we're recording the piano. I can just press K, turn on the metronome or turn it off, and Shift K. So sometimes, because I'm turning the metronome on and off a lot, because I like to listen to it, make sure, especially when I'm in that production phase, to have the metronome on to like help me be aware that, hey, am I in time? But then if you're listening back and you're focused more on the sound, then it's not very fun to listen to the metronome. Number 82, just a little advice thing when you're recording bass lines. There's some really cool bass instruments in GarageBand. So Option Shift S to bring a software instrument up, Y to bring over the library, and I'm going to show you just the Liverpool bass. So this is like a classic Hofner, Paul McCartney type bass, and this is what it sounds like. And this is the tip I want to tell you, just using octaves when you're recording bass to make it sound more interesting. And just listen to this bass line. All right, see, I don't need the click. I'm going to turn that off. One thing that this bass line is great. I didn't play this bass line. This is from a session musician. A simple thing you can do to make it sound more advanced and cooler is using octaves. So if you're doing like a walk down A, G, F, C, one thing you can do with bass is to use octaves. So I'm going to show you on musical typing because you can't see my hands right now. So I'll bring up musical typing with Command K. I'll go down an octave here. Notice if I'm going to, like, if I'm doing a walk down like this. And then back up to C. When you're playing H, the next one, just play it the octave up. So it would be like this. All I'm doing there, it sounds a lot more interesting, right? But all I'm doing there is I'm playing the octaves. Number 83 is experiment with the amps and amp simulators when you're playing guitars, but also sometimes it's fun when you're working with background vocals and things like this. You don't have to use amps and amp simulators just on guitars. So if I go to like our electric guitar track, and I'm just going to open up the controls window by pressing B and go over to controls tab. Open up a new plugins window. So I'm hovering over here and going down to amps and pedals. So we have an amp designer, a bass amp designer, and a pedal board. So I'm talking about the pedal board actually. All of these pedals that have their own unique dials on them as well. And a couple filters here. I like to use distortion on things to help bring out the harmonics in a sound. And what that's going to do is just make it sound more interesting. And you don't need a lot of distortion. I'm not talking about like super rock heavy distortion, but just a little bit of kind of fuzz or a little bit of flavor that can add something to an instrument. So these are all really, really cool things. And you can just click and drag them in, probably better one at a time, and just see what you like. For example, on this guitar, I'm just going to solo it out and play it. And I can just play with the level of distortion. I like that sound, to be honest. It's a bit much, but see, I can turn it off. So this is what the real guitar sounds like with the distortion on. Probably a bit too much, so turn that down. And distortion might always sound too much when you're listening to things in solo, so it's always good to listen to it in context with things. So that means taking it off solo, off this headphones. And it's not just distortion, right? There's pitch, there's modulation, filters, dynamics, delays. So experiment with this. It's kind of hidden in the plugin window, but it's under amps and pedals, pedal board, and it doesn't have to just be on guitars. Number 84, recording audio in GarageBand. Huge topic, just a few little tips though. When you're looking at recording audio in GarageBand, let's focus on like recording audio right out of a microphone, right? You'll probably have one of two options. Either you have a microphone that goes directly into your computer through USB, or you have an interface. I recommend the interface route because you're going to get a much better quality. Here's the tip for this is setting the right gain amount when you are recording audio in GarageBand. And what I mean by this is, actually, I have an interface here. I'm just gonna show you. This is an interface. I don't longer use this interface anymore. It's the Focusrite Scarlett, and you'll be able to find these on Amazon or any music store, to be honest. And there's a level here. It's a gain, and it's just a knob. And this is the amount of. Well, gain is super important because it controls how much sound is going to be picked up from the microphone. You need to add a lot of gain to a microphone because the microphone itself is very weak. So that's why we have an interface to apply power, gain, but also to exchange the signal from my voice wave, which is an analog signal, to a digital signal. Don't worry about all that. It's just really focus on the amount of gain and how you kind of put this into context when you're recording a vocal. So let's say it's on this track here. You're going to want to make sure that it's definitely not red. So remember when I was talking about the master track, like Shift Command M, and I was focused on this track down here, and I was telling you, make sure you don't see red down here. You're going to want to make sure that, you definitely don't see red. It kind of lands in the middle, like a bit green. And I'll just show you a rough example of my vocal here anywhere. And I just want to show you where you should aim for with your vocal when you're recording it.
1, 2, oh wait.
So see how it's just landing in the middle here? start there, like landing it in the middle. Lean on always recording a little bit less than too much, because we can always correct adding volume later. What we can't correct is bringing the volume. We can bring the volume down later, but what can happen if you record in too loud is, and when it's red, is it's going to start distorting. And then we can't change that after the fact. So lean on the side of like recording with less gain, but make sure it's at least in the middle with green. Another way to look at that is just notice like how fat is your vocal signal. So you can see if we zoom in on my vocal, like this white stuff is the vocal signal. If your vocal signal like reaches the edges of this, if it's just really fat and white, that's not a good thing. You're going to want to turn that volume down and find that sweet spot of gain, because that's going to give you a better recording. Number 85 is adding third-party samples into GarageBand. I'm going to use the company called Splice. It's a third-party sample library that I do use, and I'm going to just show you an example here. So this is what Splice looks like. Don't worry too much. It's not really about Splice here. It's more like using samples. So what are samples? Samples are musical bits. They could be like, you could sample an entire song, which is an entire audio file, and you can drag in that audio file to GarageBand. A sample could also be like also known as like a one shot, which means like one kick drum. And I'm going to show you that right now. Like, look at this kick thick. So that's just a kick drum. This one too, it's just a kick drum, but this one is actually a loop. Like this is a full-on loop. So let me do a bit of both. I'm going to drag in this kick, and I'm just looking over to GarageBand here on the empty space. There it is. And I'm going to drag in this longer one, just to give you an example. And it's just added 2 new tracks, and it's brought in the file names in for me too. So I'm going to just drag these into the middle so you can see them. And I'll drag them up to the top so you can see them a bit better too. Now let's focus in just on the kick drum, which is this one here. So you can see it's just one little piece of audio. I'm dragging it to bar 17, and it sounds like this. That's all it is. So we can use that, and now that we know how to quickly copy things, I can hold Option and click, and I can make a little beat here. So something like this. And you can just copy this whole region to the next one, and you can make a beat. It's about, if you really like the sound of this kick drum, then you can use this as your drums, just like instead of the kick in this neo soul. If we don't like that kick drum, go back another tip. When I broke these drums out into MIDI, and remember when I had the kick on its own track? Well, if you don't like the sound of this neo soul kick, you can just exchange it with any sample that you have. And then you have a bit of like a fatter kick drum. Like this is definitely a fatter kick drum. So that's how you can work with like one-shot samples. And then we have this other one here, which is this entire drum loop. So a couple things here. Notice how we are in 95 beats per minute. And this sample is 112 beats per minute, and it's a loop. So that's not good, because it's definitely not going to be in time with our song. And unfortunately, it's not easy to time stretch this in GarageBand. So the only way around this would be to like stretch it with another software. So there's really no easy way around that. But what we could do is we could just cut things up, right? Like if we like bits of this sample, this snare sound here. If I like that snare sound, I can just cut it around, make a cut here and a cut here, and I can delete what's on the sides, and now I have just this snare sound with a bit of a hi-hat in it. So there's actually 2 sounds in this one, a snare and a hi-hat. I'm just going to cut this hi-hat. So now I have a snare sample and a hi-hat. So watch what I can do here. I'm just going to duplicate this track. I'm going to call this audio 13 track hi-hat. I'm going to call this one snare. And I'm going to call this top one kick. So I can make a little beat out of what I have here. So let's just zoom out so I can make it a bit more organized. I'm going to bring my hi-hat down. I'm going to bring my snare over here. So just with the snare and the kick, what we had here, we can take a listen to what that sounds like. And not a great sample. We might have to go in there and cut this a bit more. Maybe cut it, make it a little bit more snappy. So it would sound like this. And then we would drag the other ones around. You can see what I'm doing here though, is I'm just, now that I know that this little bits of audio is available to use, I can just kind of design my own sound. And I'm going to do the same thing with the hi-hat here. And that's just with drum samples, right? There are guitar samples, there are vocal samples, there are many hundreds of samples you can use. Splice is a great library. There are many other libraries that you can use. Number 86 is how to quickly transpose audio and MIDI in GarageBand. So that means like shifting audio up by semitones or by whole notes. So let's take an example of our bass here that we recorded. If I want that to be up a key, then I just hold Option up arrow and notice how it says +1 semitone. If I keep going up, it will just continue to go up in semitones. I can also go back to 0 and go Shift Option up arrow, and that moves it up whole octaves. So +12 semitones, +24. Now I'm going down. I can do in the negatives as well. Not something you probably would do in this track, but here's an example of how you might use it in context. So this piano, you could duplicate this piano, drag the region down by holding Option, dragging down. I can do Shift Option up. Now I have two pianos, but one's in like a low piano and one's nice and high. So I might lower the volume down that one is 12 semitones higher. It's given us more sound because they're not playing the same thing anymore. This one's a complete octave higher. I could also go and open up the library and change that to a new instrument to give it a different flavor as well. Another thing you might use this is when you're dragging in samples again, like if we're in C major, but you drag in a sample, like a guitar sample you really like that's in C sharp, then you would drag in the sample and then do Option down arrow to transpose it down 1 semitone so that you're in the same key. Number 87, and the last one in the recording category, is to add a limiter to your master output track. And stay with me, I'm going to show you where this is so it helps you not blow your speakers. I'm going to just press B on any track that I'm on, and I'm going to go over to master. And I'm going to explain the difference between track and master in the next category. And then on these tabs here, I'm going to go to output. And notice you actually should have, I think by default, GarageBand gives you a limiter. And it's just a plugin. So if you don't see this limiter, just go to the bottom, get that little blue bar up, click it, Dynamics, Limiter. All a limiter does, it increases the volume, which it adds gain to the master track, which is all your tracks. So this is what you want to do, and we'll do this in the next category. This is called mastering. What I suggest doing is, like with your tracks, just have this at 0. Have the output level, negative 0.5, or you can also have it at negative 0.1. Anything in the negatives. And what this is going to do is it actually will chop off any audio signal that gets higher than negative 0.2, which means if you have a sample that you were added in that's like really loud, and if you press play, it might be so loud that it will blow up your speakers. This is one thing you can do to save that or to not have that happen. Just remember that if you do have this on, that you have to just remember that because sometimes things could be distorting and you might not know it because it's chopping off the signal. So it is a great thing to do, but this is technically going to stop all the distortion because it's actually going to limit any audio that's coming over. So you might not hear it. Easy thing to do, but more of an advanced thing, because if you forget it's on and you don't know that your tracks are distorting, that's not a good thing. So let's move on to the next category now, which is mixing and mastering. I'm going to touch on a little bit on different tips, things you can look out for when you're mixing your track, and then we'll talk a little bit about what I was just saying, mastering. And not going to get too deep on this because this is a huge can of worms, which we're going to be opening now. So the first one is the difference between track and master. Like if you press B to open up your controls window on any track, so if I start from the top, notice how on every track you'll have two tabs on the left. It says track and master. You just need to get your head wrapped around that there are going to be, in your session, there are going to be multiple tracks. You can have one track in your session, but you can also have hundreds of tracks. But there's always just going to be one master track. So you have multiple tracks, one master track. And then you switch back and forth here to edit the controls of your track and master. So why is the track and master on this? Why can you go to it on every track here? It's because this kick track is being output, it's being sent to the master track. Same thing with a snare track. Same thing, every single track here. So when we go to the master track and fiddle around with these things, we're affecting everything. We're affecting this lead vocal track, but we're also affecting the bass track when we mess around with these dials too. A little more on this later. It's just to understand the difference right now between these two. Number 89 is talking about the master echo and master reverb that you would see in each track. So it's usually at the bottom here, master echo and master reverb, and it's slider dials. When we go to master, notice how in this drop down you have master echo and master reverb, right? What this is there is an echo and a reverb currently on your master track, but it's not on. What this means here is that on the master track, we have an echo and a reverb, right? And here in this bottom drop down, we can choose what that reverb is. So let's just go through this example. Let's talk about the lead vocal here. So on the lead vocal, we have a master reverb, and we're going to choose this master reverb to be a church reverb, okay? And then we're going to choose the echo to be a 16th note slap. So we've chosen this echo and reverb for all the tracks, right? Because we're on the master. Now we can go to each track and apply that echo and reverb that we just added. And it's not on for any of the tracks, by the way. We can just apply it with these sliders on every single track. Every single track will have these sliders, and we can say, okay, for the lead vocal track, let's add a little reverb. Think of it like if it's fully to the left, there's going to be no reverb added. If it's fully to the right, it's going to be a lot of reverb. So this won't affect anything. Nothing has been affected. But if we say, hey, we want, think of it like you have the reverb over here on the master track and then all your tracks here. You can just apply a bit of reverb on every track to pick up that one master reverb. This, like what I'm talking about here, is called sends. And this is the advanced topic that you deal with a lot when you're working in music production and in like the step up. So in Logic Pro, for example. And this is kind of like the early way to do it. Watch when I play the vocal and slide this to the right.
There's something bothering
You hear the reverb, right?
I don't know what you've been through.
Now it's all the way to the left. No reverb, right?
Ever since I could
More reverb. Echo.
Never have we lost. We can beat it if you want to.
Think of it like you might want a little bit of reverb and a little bit of echo on the lead vocal. Then you go to your bass, and maybe we don't want any on the bass. Probably we don't want any on the drums either. But what about our guitars? So I'm just clicking the guitar track. Let's add more reverb to the guitar.
Wait, was it something I said?
So what this is doing is the guitar and the vocal are now sharing the same reverb. So that's gluing things together because they seem they're in the same space now. So that's one reason why you do this stuff, so instruments can share the same space. That's all I'm going to get into. I know it's a little bit of an advanced topic there, but let's move on. I want to talk about this fader for a second. So when you first start making music in GarageBand, you might think, hey, I'm not hearing things enough, so I'm going to turn up the volume, which is a reasonable thing to think about, right? But what I think you should do is never touch that. I recommend just not touching this volume fader at all. What I recommend is if you want to hear things louder, you can turn up the volume on your interface or on your computer, like wherever you're getting the signal from. So likely on your audio interface, right? So you would like go and turn the volume up. What happens was when you do it here and you turn it up, you're actually applying gain to all your tracks. And that can affect the sound of things because you might forget about it. You might turn it up here and then turn it down on your interface. And this is just going to affect things down the line. So I just recommend not touching that. Don't worry if you do. There's always ways to fix things. It's good to get in the practice of, if you want to hear things louder, turn it up on your interface. If you don't, then don't turn anything up. If you want to hear things quieter, turn it down. And use your interface as that main benchmark reference point to turn things up and down, and don't use it on the master track. Number 91 is taking a look at the old plugins that are available in GarageBand. So let's take a look at our Liverpool bass. Let's open up our controls window again by pressing B, and we can go to the plugins. So we talked about plugins and where you can find them and where you can add them, but there's also this bottom section, audio units, and this is where your paid plugins are going to be. So these are actually companies, Baby Audio, Fab Filter. You won't have them here, but you will have this one, Apple. And you're going to have all of these. So these are just old, like legacy plugins that you can use. And some of them are cool. You're looking over here and you're not finding something you want. Check in here if it happens to be an old plugin that you can use. That's what's under the Apple category here. Number 92 is using a de-esser when you're mixing on a vocal track. A de-esser is going to take away the S's of your vocal, which every vocal, when you record a vocal, will have S's. Sometimes when the lyrics involve more words with S's in it, you're going to have more S's. And this is also known as sibilance on the words so. Like, especially when you're singing, it can be harsh. And what a de-esser does is it acts a little bit like a compressor and an EQ almost. And don't worry about that if you don't know what those are. It's just going to take away those harsh S's. Go to your controls window, go to your plugins, go down to dynamics, and de-esser. And then what I recommend is just starting with a preset. So if you are a female, if you are recording a female voice, you can just try it. If you're a male as well, just try it here. And hear what that sounds like. You have to train your ears only to focus on the high frequencies. I think it's good if you can't hear it to add it on anyways, because I bet it's probably doing something, and then eventually your ears will get trained to hear it. Number 93 is adding distortion to your instruments to bring out more harmonics. Now, I mentioned that in an earlier tip. And so what does that actually mean? Let's look at our keys synth here. So if we want to add some distortion, let's start there. We open up our controls window and we can go down to plugins and we can look at distortion, which has its own folder. So we have a few different types of distortion. I'm just going to look at the main distortion plugin. Go up to the top here and start with something. You don't have to do anything. Just go to warm distortion. So that's changed the sound a lot, right? Too much for my liking. What's happening here is why it's being compounded a little bit is because I already have distortion on this without that plugin. What I would recommend is just try adding little bits of distortion. And if you want to be less, you just lower the drive. Like already that's better. And that's going to help that instrument stand out more and make it more interesting in your mix. And just make sure you're not always listening to things in solo, but taking it off and seeing how that sound that you just added, that plugin you added, how does it fit with everything? Don't get too focused on single tracks. Always be getting back out to look at the song, because that's what it is at the end of the day, right? It's the song, not single tracks. Number 94 is how do you make your tracks sound wide when you're mixing? So width comes from it's a big topic, but a few little things that you can do to add width that make big impact right away. Simply the use of panning. So notice how all of these tracks, they have a little, this is called a pan pot actually, and you can double click in and write a number in there if you want, but you can also just click and drag to the left or click and drag to the right. And that means it's going to place that sound in your stereo field in front of you. So you have two speakers, right? Go all the way to the left. The bass is just going to be in your right ear right now. And now it's in your left ear. We did that with automating pan in a few tips ago. This is going to give you a lot of width. You wouldn't do that with a bass. You wouldn't put it all the way to the left. You typically want to have your bass drum, your bass instrument, your kick drum, your snare drum, things that provide a lot of stability and groove. You do want those fairly center. And then things that can be a bit more flexible, so like keys, guitars, harmonies, you can spread those out. So you can have harmonies very far right. You can have electric guitars off to the side a little bit or off fully. So you find a little bit of balance on each side to make width with all the instruments in your song, and that gives your song a lot of width. The other ways to add a lot of width is by using plugins. So some plugins that you can just put on things right away to make it sound wider are, let's look at our keys again here and open up our controls window. The folder I want to highlight here is modulation. So a chorus would make something sound a bit wider. Flangers can also do that a little bit. Watch when I just put a chorus on. In the presets, just go mega wide. So that these types of plugins you can add right on the instrument track to add more width. So typically I would, in a song I'm working on, I'd have harmony tracks pan far left and far right. I'd also have chorus effects on some synths to make the synth kind of wide throughout the song. You have to ask yourself, okay, if your song's not wide, how do you want it to sound? What do you want to make it wide? Do you want it to have like a lot of vocals to be really big? Do you want it to have to be a lot of bass? You can have a bass on the left and a bass on the right. And you just have to go about it that way. Ask yourself, what do you want it to sound like? And then you kind of attack it like that. Number 95 is making your drum sounds pop and making them a bit more punchy if you're just using drummer tracks. So let's focus on this Neo Soul kit, bring it up to the top here, and just have a look at the sound of this. Now, a few things are going to make this sound a bit more interesting, and they live in the controls window. So just press B. And we have our mix here, and I really just want to focus on the mix. So you want to ask yourself, do the instruments sound mixed well? Like, is the kick too soft or too loud? Is the snare too soft or too loud? And these are all volume knobs, and you can just change the volume a little bit more. So sometimes I like the kick to be a bit louder. Maybe the hat's a bit quieter. So this is one thing you can do, like, to make things sound more punchy and pop. This is just the volume of things. Next would be to turn on the compression and then apply some compression. So watch when I apply the compression. Try to listen to what happens to the sound. It's always good to turn this on and apply a bit of compression to your drums to add more punch. If you want to dial a little bit deeper on this compression, you can go over to the left here and just click in the middle of this compressor. And just like always, go to the drop down here and you could add a type of drum compressor, like a classic drum sound. And that's already made it sound much nicer. The other things are to apply more distortion, so drive, and also a bit of room, which is reverb. So adding a bit of drive will add more crunch. And room, adding room will make it sound more realistic, more roomy. And you apply these just to taste, really, how much, lots of room would sound like this. Which sometimes is the vibe you want. If you want a tighter vibe, maybe a smaller drum set, you'd bring the room down. And notice how when the room is low, the drums are kind of more in your face a little bit. And that's can be a good thing. But sometimes if you want it to be a bit wider, a bit bigger, and not in your face, you apply more room. Now the drums are kind of fill up the space, they fill up the stage around you. And as I bring this down, they come closer to your face. Completely a stylistic things, but this is how you would make your drums pop more and sound more punchy. Number 96 is taking a look at the muddy range in an EQ. So you may or may not have heard of this term called muddy. If the songs you're making just don't sound good, there's probably a couple things. One is just the overall general volume of things. Two would be the actual EQ of things. So when we talked about EQ, and it's probably the biggest one there, because a lot of your sounds are likely clashing without you even knowing. And one problem area where you can look for in an EQ is, I'll show you, and let's look at this vocal range here. So let's look at my vocal. Open up the controls window and go to EQ on this tab. The problem area is around 200, 300, 400, and this can be this muddy sound. And I'll show you what it sounds like.
But I can't read your mind.
That's what it is.
I don't know why you still hide. Can you give me a little? I don't care if I'm up all night.
Pretty standard, and I don't want to just tell you to do this on everything, but it's fairly reasonable to say you likely do a dip in this range on your vocal to make it sound more clear. Don't go drastic like this, or else it will sound like this.
But I can't read
sound too thin.
I don't know why you still hide.
Just very, very subtle, and you can sweep it across and try to hear the difference. This is going to come down to how tuned your ears are. And it comes down to where your voice frequencies land. Like if you have a really high voice, it might be more in this range. I don't want to just say go and do that to everything, but I want to just point out this range between 100 and 400. There is likely some frequencies that are making your mix sound muddy, and that you can sweep in this range and dip out frequencies in this range on some of your instruments and see what happens to the sound of your mix. You can do that to everything and listen to it back one at a time. Is it helping your song? And that's the best way to tune your ears, is just by practicing. Number 97 is adding paid plugins to a track. So as you start to get better at GarageBand, you might want to go out and buy a plugin. If you do that, this is where you would add the paid plugins. And to be honest, it's in the same spot. We touched on this earlier. Just go to the plugins, go to the blue window, that little blue line that pops up, and go to audio units. So here's the paid plugins that I have, and I'll show you one. This is a very popular paid reverb plugin. So this is what the plugin looks like. It's a reverb plugin. It's this company, Valhalla Vintage. And you can buy all sorts of plugins. At the beginning, I recommend just using the plugins that are there in GarageBand. Just don't even overwhelm yourself by going out and buying any. There will be a point where you're going to be like, I kind of want a different sound than the stock plugins that I'm getting in GarageBand. So you can go out and buy a reverb plugin. You can go out and buy a compressor plugin. You can go out and buy an EQ plugin. And I would start there: reverbs, compressors, EQs, delays. And this plugin is a really good reverb paid plugin. It's probably around $50. Number 98 is using the compare option that you have in the controls window of a track. And this is going to help you really tune your ears, because you're practicing your ears to compare two sounds against each other. So if we focus on our lead vocal track, and let's say I'm interested in comparing what the reverb sounds like with this much on versus having none on. So try putting it on, and watch when I actually click this compare button is going to turn blue. So I'm going to have it come up here, and now I can compare what it sounds like this versus nothing by just clicking compare. So it's remembered where my reverb setting was. Now that I'm on blue, I can also bring up the ambience. And now if I press compare again, I'm comparing this track with ambience and reverb, or without both of them. So watch now, both will come off. When compare is off, it's not doing anything. When compare is on, when it's blue, now you change things. So for example, let's try a high boost or a low cut. And I press compare, it's going to turn those dials off. Play with the compare button. This, like much of a comparison, is not a good idea. I would compare one thing at a time so you can really focus on that thing. If you're comparing a low cut, a high, and an ambience and a reverb, you might not know what you're hearing and what to compare with. So just start one thing at a time and work with the compare button to tune your ears. Number 99 is how to think like a mixer. I'll try to take this as beginner as possible because I think it's important you grasp this philosophy to just help you think more practical as a mixing engineer. This comes at the end of the stage when you've recorded your tracks, you've added all the sounds you like. Now is the time to say, okay, now that I have all the sounds and tracks I want in GarageBand, how do I make them all work together? That's what a mixing engineer does. What I think you should understand as a mixing engineer is to think of it like a 3D box that's in front of you. And you have this 3D box that has depth, it has height, and it has width. Your song lives in that 3D box that's in front of you. And your job as a mixing engineer is to just place all your tracks and all your sounds in this box. At its simplest form, really, that's what you do. So one thing is you have a lot of creativity because you can choose where you want to place things and you can choose what things you want to cut out, what things you want to boost and add. The way that you, as a mixing engineer, place these things is through the tools of volume, frequencies, so equalization, EQ, reverb, space, and also delay, but predominantly those three things without going too much deeper. For example, compression and distortion, saturation, there's a lot of things involved. So if you are more intermediate and advanced, yes, there are more things you can do, but at its simplest form, volume, frequency, and space are the three tools that you use to move these things around the box. As you start to learn more about that and you're closing your eyes and listening to your song, you can say to yourself, okay, what should I put further back in the box? You do that by turning the volume down. And as you do that and listen to it, notice in your head that sound goes further away. Or as you bring the volume up, that sound comes closer in the box. Or if you pan things to the left, you can hear it going off to the side. As you widen things, like you add chorus effects, you can hear it being spread out across the box. And this is how you should think like a mixing engineer. At its simplest form, there's a lot more to be unpacked in that. And I would suggest looking at the courses I have or some of the other YouTube videos I have if you want to learn more about that. Number 100, we've made it. And thanks for sticking along in this video if you've made it so far to the tip 100. By the way, check out the free download I have for my 5 steps to learning GarageBand faster in the description. I do go into much more detail. And if you are really into learning GarageBand faster, check out some of the paid courses I have for GarageBand where I really, really go deep and in detail. And it's not as rushed maybe as in this video, even though it's quite long in this video. I go into more detail there. 100 is on the master tab here on every track. We have these 3 tabs, right? We have effects, which we've gone over, the echo and reverb. We have the output and we have EQ. I want to focus on the output right now. This is mastering. This is how you master a track in GarageBand. And I said this before, you don't have to worry about this too much at all until the final stage. You will want to worry about it at the final stage because this is really where your mix is going to, for one, be louder and it's your opportunity to glue things together. So that's what this squeeze knob is for. That's what this compressor knob is for. And that's what this limiter knob is for. So we went over a limiter, right? When we were going to save our speakers by putting it on a low output. You want to increase the volume of your mix up into a certain point. You also want to squeeze your mix because remember, we're on the master track. It's where all the tracks are going. So essentially we say you want to take all your tracks and squeeze them together, like gluing them together. And that means like you're compressing things. And then you want to take that and make it louder. You can also experiment with applying a bit of EQ, but I wouldn't necessarily do it too much unless you know what you're doing because this is going to dramatically affect the sound of your song. Every knob here and dial you put on and work with is going to really change the way your mix is going to sound. And notice as I turn these off and on, it turns the plugins off over here, right? So this limiter happens to do with this limiter plugin, this compressor, this EQ, this exciter, and this squeeze is So what I would recommend, simple, is to turn them all on, but not at the same time. Start one at a time and go to the loudest part in your song. So typically from probably right around here. I'd open up my controls window, go to my master, go to my output. I would make sure everything's off. So all these are off. I'd start with this first one. I'd turn it on, I'd go to the bottom, and then I'd listen to it and I'd slowly increase it until I hear what's happening.
Up all night, so don't be scared to put a bruise on your pride. 'Cause I wanna get to know you more than just your good side.
So this is compressing it and is making it a bit louder when I go up to the top here. But when I squeeze it too much, it's losing a little bit of dynamics. It's actually making the things sound too squished together. When it sounds louder, it's going to sound better because louder is better. But you don't want to squeeze things too much. And then go to the next one. Turn this on. Much brighter, right? Same thing with this. Let's turn this on and see what happens when we work with these. I wanna get to know you more than just your good side. Good side. Good side. I wanna get to know you more than just your up all night. So don't be scared to put a bruise on you. Again, if you want to do a quick comparison with what you've just done, you don't always have to use the compare knob. You can also just turn the thing off, which what you just did. So like turn it off, listen, turn it on. What changes? Then keep going, compress it a little bit more. And then this, make it louder. So don't be scared to put a bruise on your pride. 'Cause I wanna get to know you more than just your good. If you're not comfortable with doing it, if you don't hear anything, don't worry about it. What you could do is actually turn all these off, and you can export the song and send it to a mastering engineer where you can pay someone to master it for probably anywhere from like $20 to $50, or you can use some online services that can master tracks for you based on an algorithm, which is a popular thing to do nowadays. Appreciate you sticking around. If you watched the full thing with me, remember they're all timestamped for you in the bottom. Take a look at some of my paid courses if you want to find out more information to learn GarageBand faster, to really go deep on GarageBand. I have courses where I create a song with you, I mix a song with you, I do everything with you, and I hold your hand through the whole process, and eventually you have your own song at the end of it. So take a look at some of those. Feel free to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, so we can kind of get it out in the YouTube world for other people to watch as well. And then maybe I'll see you in one of my next videos.